Welcome back to the Cerebral Cricketer podcast. Today we have a very, very special guest on the show today, a man who defined clutch performances in Australian cricket. As captain, he led Australia to under-19 World Cup glory in 2012, finishing the tournament undefeated with a batting average of a whopping 276 runs, winning the player of the tournament. A right-handed batsman and an off-spinner, he has played in the Sheffield Shield, Marsh One Day Cup and Big Bash for Western Australia, Perth Scorchers and South Australia. He has also played in the Nepalese Premier League and Bangladesh Premier League not too long ago. So thank you for coming on the show, Will Bosisto.
Thanks, Tanzine. I really appreciate it. And it's great to be involved in platforms like this. I love the work that you're doing. I've heard a few excerpts that you've done with a couple of other players. So, thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. And, the honour is mine to be able to have the opportunity to talk to professional cricketers like yourself because I love cricket and, cricket is not an easy sport to play. It's very mentally challenging. So I love, sort of hearing insights about players who've played their game and through their journeys and trying to learn as much as possible so I can, apply on my own batting front, essentially. So the aim of the show, as I mentioned prior, we want to get an idea of each professional cricketer, their sort of journey with cricket, how they got started, and understanding their career and how it sort of panned out and the learnings they've taken from. So I actually was reading one of your articles that I think you were interviewed in, and it was really interesting. I've just got it here. It says Bosisto's earliest memories of cricket are of playing with his father at Jasper Green Reserve, a park down the road from his house in Perth, every morning before school. So I'd love to hear your experience as a kid growing up in Perth and what was life like, and what was your relationship with cricket at a young age?
Yeah, it's spot on. I was very lucky, A, to have a park close by, and B, to have a dad that was happy to help, a young kid's passion, I guess. So, yeah, I loved cricket. I loved all sports. I still do to this day. I'm a very passionate sports person. I love watching sport as well as playing. So, I guess cricket was one. I played Aussie rules football in the winter and cricket in the summer, like a lot of young kids in Perth do. We had a local park just down the road. So I can remember waking Dad up and begging him to come down and bowl at me down at the park, and so we did that right the way through to, I'm not sure at what age we would have been when we would have stopped doing that, but even to this day. Dad's, is one of my biggest supporters and, throws balls at me, gives me feedback. He's I certainly wouldn't be where I am or in life, but particularly in sport, without the influence of Dad. And very lucky with my mum as well. She's a psychologist by profession, so certainly have at times bounced some ideas off her and tried to sort of leverage their skill sets as well, given that they're, quite different in the way that they have approached their own lives. But yeah, I've been very fortunate to have the parents that I've had that have no doubt helped me in my journey so far.
Those are amazing. So there's a lot to actually unpack there. I want to start with your dad. So was your dad very involved in cricket himself when he was, I guess, your age, and he played a lot of cricket? And did he share a lot of his learnings from cricket onto you? So what's the relationship there specifically with your dad when it comes to coaching, for example?
Yeah, so Dad played cricket as a young guy. Same thing, cricket and footy. He did his ACL, and in those days they wouldn't operate on people unless they were virtually like professionals, sort of thing. So it was quite different to nowadays, where if you're an amateur and you can pay the money, you can get it operated on so pretty easily, and they even do pets and things like that, repairing injuries and ACLs and things. But yeah, Dad did his ACL and then didn't really play a huge amount of sport after that, just because he struggled with his knee a little bit. But yeah, so never played professionally, but always, I play golf with him often, and he's a very handy sports person. So it's more a person that has your back, has your best interests. He's as fit as anything, so he's able to throw balls and be out in the sun and do all those things that some kids probably don't have the luxury of having their parents able to do. So that's probably in a nutshell the influence Dad's had.
And so maybe from a very specific coaching perspective, like I can only speak from my own experience where perhaps you join a club and then there's a coach and then the coach is teaching how to bat and the coach is telling you like, oh, have a, use your top hand and, keep that control over the whole bat and, try to use less of your bottom hand, like these specific coaching things that you're learning from a young age. Was your dad kind of part of that journey, or would you say that, like as you kind of expressed, where your dad was very supportive, that he basically facilitated the right people to be around in order for you to succeed?
Yeah, great question. I don't sort of recall necessarily dad being, he's certainly not pushy in the sense that, he would never, try to be my batting coach or anything like that. He would just always be there if I wanted to bounce ideas off him. I think a lot of my learning occurred just from watching. I was such an avid cricket lover that I'd be up watching the test matches on TV. I can still remember in primary school, the test match would start. I loved the test matches over east because they would start at 7:30 or sometimes 7 o'clock in the morning, so you could watch an hour's play before you had to be down at school. So I'd always be, bargaining with mum to watch the very last over that I possibly could before I'd race down to school and hopefully not miss the bell for the first class. So I think I did a lot of my learning probably subconsciously just from watching some of the greats of the game, which I didn't realise at the time. That were certainly my idols, but the Langers, the Haydens, the Pontings, Damien Martyn, some extraordinary players that I was lucky enough to grow up watching. Not every era gets to grow up watching a team of that dominance. And I think I learned a lot of the way I approached the game and understood the game from watching those guys.
That's really interesting. You're talking about those role models. Which particular, you being a right-handed batsman, was there anyone that really struck out when it comes to, as you were emphasizing, you watched a lot of cricket. Was there a particular, for example, right-handed batsman, like, I don't know, it could be Ponting, that really stood out for you or really inspired you, or was there anyone else in particular?
My favourite player has always been Mike Hussey. Being a West Australian, he was a top order batter, and I just loved the way that he seemed to be the man for any situation. And that's the sort of player that I've always aspired to be. Is be able to adapt my game to play for a draw in a red ball game if it's needed, or be able to score it 10, 15 and over at the back end of a T20 if it's needed. And I think Mike Hussey was the perfect example of a guy like that. In terms of sort of elegance of stroked play, I always loved watching Damien Martyn. He was probably the classiest player that I can remember growing up watching. But a couple of my other favourite players were a pair of Sri Lankans, Mahela Jayawardene and Kumar Sangakarra. I just used to love the way they went about it, and they seemed to have really cool temperaments and just piled on endless amounts of runs. So I used to love watching those guys go about the business as well.
Yeah, I think Michael Hussey probably doesn't get talked as much compared to, I guess, other greats in Australian cricket. Like, I definitely resonate with what you said with Mike Hussey. Like, especially when I was watching him from a young age, the fact that he was essentially, he didn't, have it easy where he just kind of started in the Australian team from a young age. He was in and out of the team because, the team was so strong. But then when he did get into the Australian team, really made it count. He showed a lot of character, batting in different, positions from time to time according to the team's needs. And when he did, he really performed and sort of, adapted to the situation and played really, pressure cooker innings, So I definitely resonate. I think Mike Hussey isn't talked enough. And I'm just curious, have you, because you're obviously from Western Australia, like, have you had the opportunity to meet him and form a relationship with him?
Yeah, I have met Mike a few times. He's a wonderful, wonderful bloke. He's exactly as he plays his cricket, really. He's full of energy, full of exuberance, a real gentleman, really open to sharing his ideas. And it's a funny one. I guess now that I'm a bit more mature and, have lived a bit more life, he's probably the sort of guy I should reach out to, because I feel like when I first caught up with him as a much younger player, I was sort of so in awe of him. He still sort of felt like this, such an idol and such an incredible guy that it almost felt a bit, I was a bit awestruck when I was sort of speaking to him in some ways. So, yeah, it's probably not a bad idea and a good reminder for me to follow a guy up like that because, he was super generous with his time and I certainly can remember him providing just a few little technical things that at the time really helped my game and just the way that he approached the game, even with the books that he wrote and things like that. I can remember sort of analysing the way that he would approach a T20 innings, for example. And, that's a sort of a blueprint that I have used in the past in my own game. So I think a guy like that who's played as much cricket as he has, and like you said, he hasn't done it the easy way. Not that there is an easy way in cricket, but he's certainly sort of earned every single opportunity that he's been given. And yeah, I feel like that held him in good stead to be the incredible player that he was.
That's really interesting. You talked about having a blueprint, and you were inspired by Mike Hussey in order to implement that blueprint. I'm just curious, like what is that blueprint exactly when it comes to his blueprint that helped you with your own game?
Yeah, so it was in one of his books he wrote about in T20 cricket how he would, in the first couple of overs, he would approach the game almost as if it was a 50-over situation. So he would give him, this is if he was opening the batting, he would give himself a couple of overs to play, sensibly positive cricket shots. And then from overs 3 through to 5, so sort of the middle to back end of the power play, he would look to target the first couple of balls of an over to put the bowler under pressure and therefore sort of reduce the bowler's likelihood that they're going to be looking to dismiss him and rather looking to contain him, which sort of straight away puts the batter on top. So that was his approach. He would try and target sort of overs 3, 4, 5 early in the over. And then over 6, he would sort of look to dial it back a little bit because he felt like from a team perspective, if you lose a wicket in the last over at the back end of the power play, then it's putting a new batter under pressure to sort of come in, and it's difficult to score freely with the field spread when you've only first come in. So that's a sort of a vague approach that I've often sort of tried to adopt in some respects. And then he spoke about from over 7 through to 14, trying to hit the ball hard along the ground, be aggressive with your running between wickets, try and get as many twos as you possibly can, like hit the sweepers firmly and look for twos, not to take too many undue risks, try not to hit the ball in the air too much if you don't need to. And then from overs 15 through to 20, that's when you might be looking to target your boundary options and, have sort of your riskier shots in the back of your mind and looking to take on those boundary options with a sort of with your 2s and 1s as your fallbacks if you can't get your boundaries away.
Thank you so much for sharing those insights regarding strategy. I might ask you a few questions since we're on this topic, just out of curiosity. Would it be fair to say, like maybe in this current day and age, like you mentioned that the approach from his end was to approach as like an ODI or 50-over match, and then go from there and kind of make use of the power play and then kind of preserve the wicket because you don't want to put another batsman under pressure coming in after the power play is done. Would it be fair to say that perhaps another template that is used, it isn't necessarily wrong either, is to just go hard from ball one? I know it's easier said than done, obviously, when you have like 140-kilometer-an-hour bowlers that are swinging it in or swinging it away. But is that template that you mentioned, a blueprint, flexible in regards to the situation that might be a little different depending on, like, for example, you're in the Bangladesh Premier League and perhaps in that time, like the openers were spinners, right? So I don't know if you had to implement that phase. You said overs 8 to 12 when it comes to spinners and looking for twos, having to kind of shift that blueprint and then kind of apply it differently in different conditions. Does that make sense? So maybe the blueprint isn't necessarily set in stone depending on the matchups. Obviously, number 1 and number 2 is the conditions.
No, you're absolutely spot on. It's a very generic sort of a blueprint, I guess, if you like, and it's, yeah, like you say, it's condition dependent, bowler dependent, situation of the game, scoreboard dependent. All those, so many factors come into particularly short form cricket and the tactics of that. Especially in a run chase where you know what the target is that you've got to get to. So absolutely, that's totally flexible. I've just found it at times, and bearing in mind this was written over 10 years ago, and so the game has evolved significantly since then as well. But it has been over the years a good reminder for me at times, rather than to, panic and throw your wicket away after facing a dot ball, for example. It can just be a good subconscious reminder to yourself to be like, no, I've got more time than I think. This phase of over 17 to 14 is about hitting the sweepers hard. My boundary ball will come, being aware of your strengths. And I just think at times it's helped me to overcome certain situations that perhaps other players, or before I had this knowledge, I might not have been able to overcome them in the same way.
Just out of curiosity, watching you play, I know that you like to play the sweep shot, and it is a difficult shot, especially against spinners, and very effective when it does come off, especially in T20s. For example, what comes to mind is Dawood Malan. I know the way he plays his sweep shots, he's a bit underrated T20 cricketer, but it was highly effective depending on the type of bowlers he was facing. So was that something that you started playing, like the sweep shot, later towards your career, or was it something that you always honed as a youngster? Because I know that when I was doing my research, I read somewhere that you also, it actually popped up a few times, you're talking about how your game is suited to different conditions as well, which I can definitely see, especially when I was watching you in the Bangladesh Premier League as such. So was the sweep shot sort of maybe inspired by even what Mike Hussey was talking about in that blueprint you just mentioned, or is it something that you honed as a younger cricketer or from a younger age, or was it something that you kind of came across with and you figured that you had to kind of implement it into your game and make that a part of your game because it's an effective way to score those twos and threes in those middle periods, especially or hitting boundaries against spinners?
Yeah, it's a really good point and a good question. I think it's a shot that I have had as a part of my game for a long time now, and I think I've been really fortunate as a younger player. I was in some sort of Aussie 19 squads and things like that got to tour overseas to some subcontinental conditions, and so I think I was exposed to turning conditions, facing high quality spin bowling from a young age, and I felt like being exposed to those conditions just made me aware that, geez, if I'm going to score freely and succeed against high quality spin bowling, a sweep shot is a non-negotiable. That's sort of how I felt. And also, from facing some guys, I had a season playing in Sri Lanka, and I faced some spinners that I literally just couldn't pick them. Like, they had amazing wrong-uns and things like that, wrist spinners, finger spinners, that we're not exposed to often here in Australia. And so I had to find a way to survive, basically. And I felt like, okay, the ball's not bouncing much. It's spinning sideways both ways. And there's certain bowlers, I can't tell which way they're spinning it out of the hand. I'm having to read it off the wicket. So at least if I play with a cross bat, I'm more chance of making contact. And I sort of found that, that made me watch the ball really closely, because if you're playing any cross bat shot, you've got to be, your head's got to be committed to the line of the ball. You've got to watch it right the way onto your bat. And so, and B, it gave me avenues to score runs, which I think any bowler will know that if someone's putting you under pressure by playing attacking shots and scoring runs off your best ball, then you become a hell of a lot harder to bowl against. So I think it was sort of a bit of a combo of a number of different things that led me to A, have to experiment trying to play it, B, gradually get better at playing it, and sort of experience the ups and downs of playing high quality spin bowling. But yeah, as you say, it's certainly a strength of mine and something that I'm very grateful that is in my arsenal, particularly some of the cricket that I've played more recently in some spin friendly conditions. It's been a really valuable shot to have.
It's very insightful. I actually wanted to ask maybe two questions based on what you just said. Maybe if you can give us a bit of a context of, because it's clearly evident from your answer that the season that you played in Sri Lanka was influential in terms of understanding that you needed to develop a sweep shot in order to mitigate those kind of mystery spinners or difficult spinners or accurate spinners. And then my second point would be because this is my own personal experience, playing in Australia, if you're playing normal club cricket or just playing normal cricket, obviously we're used to AstroTurf. And then if you play on higher grades, play on turf, and maybe it bounces a little lower. So I've always felt that against spinners, especially in Australian conditions, where the pitch is a little bouncier, you never really need it. You don't really need a sweep shot. Like I've never really seen personally barely anyone that plays sweep shots in just normal club cricket because the bounce is already high enough. So if someone is tall with long levers, they can just kind of judge it according to the length and play the shot accordingly. If they wanted to drive it or hoik it, they can kind of semi-play it as almost like a pacer, but not obviously not a pacer. But they just need to wait a bit more and judge the length a bit earlier. That's about it. Otherwise, so those kind of people don't really ever need to experience playing in conditions like in Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, where obviously they need to adjust because it's a slower, lower turning pitches. So I'm just curious, would you say that in general, Australian pitches would naturally make people not really need a sweep shot within their arsenal, and so like as a result, maybe that's sort of lacking in our kind of culture when it comes to cricketing culture in Australia, and so that's why, like as you mentioned, that you actually went to Sri Lanka and then felt that you needed to develop it, for example.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think you're spot on. If the ball's not turning, I don't think sweeping is necessarily should be your number one go-to. But if the ball is spinning sideways, I feel like all of a sudden a straight bat becomes a riskier option and a cross bat becomes almost a safer option, really. So that's sort of been my philosophy on it, playing spin. If the ball's not doing much sideways, I'm looking to use my feet down the wicket and get right back in my crease and sort of disrupt the bowler's length that way. But if the ball's spinning sideways, then I'm looking to disrupt them by scoring square of the wicket. And I think that that'd be a pretty common response from a lot of players who've played in multiple sort of conditions around the world. And like you say, in Australia, I mean, I have played a bit of cricket in Sydney earlier this summer, and I think the ball can grip a little bit more over there than perhaps it does in Perth. So, but having played in Brisbane, those wickets were beautiful. They were coming on nicely. So it also just depends on the surface on the day as well. But I think having the option to be able to do either, and again, coming back to my favourite ever player, Mike Hussey, I felt like his one of his greatest strengths was that he was so adaptable. He could play whatever the conditions demanded, and that's certainly something I've always strived to have as part of my game.
It's amazing, and it was a really good tangent because I needed to ask you those questions because that's what was coming to my mind. It's a really important topic, but I don't want to forget about Mum and her being a psychologist, and it was Mother's Day like a few days ago as well. So I shift back to I guess it was really interesting that you mentioned your mum was a psychologist. What kind of conversations would you say you'd be having with your mum, obviously in the context of cricket as well, and the understanding of the game in a much deeper level? Because psychology is very important. Like everyone talks about mental health, trauma that people have gone through, and unpacking that, understanding that. I'm personally, I love reading psychology books. That's kind of my thing that I do in my pastime. So I'm just curious about the conversations you had as a kid with your mum when it comes to psychology and cricket.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one because much like Dad, Mum has never been pushy necessarily with trying to be sort of overtly involved in cricket conversations but having said that, they're both super passionate about me chasing my dreams and doing what I love. So they're almost there to assist wherever I may need it, but they wouldn't sort of go out of their way to push me for any direct conversations as such. So I haven't necessarily dived too deeply into Mum's sort of psychological knowledge, but I've always been fascinated, much like you. I'm fascinated by the mental side of the game and psychology more generally. So I've sort of gone down some deep dives myself, and I've worked closely with various different sports psychologists at different times, and I've bounced their ideas off with Mum's knowledge at times, and Mum's always been a great supporter of mine and encouraged me to have greater self-belief and to if ever I come off an average performance, she'll be the first to sort of say, you could have done this, or you could, and it's always in a really positive light, and it's always coming from a lens of, gee, you're so great, you can do more, and you can achieve, and those types of ideologies. So which is really reassuring as a son, and I'm about to become a father myself, and that's something that I hope that I can pass on to my children one day, is just the confidence for them to do whatever they want to do.
Congrats, regarding becoming a father. So that must be really special timing in your life right now as well, in that sense. And yeah, psychology is so important. Where in your context, I assume that you're probably thinking, how am I going to best parent my child for the best results that they can do in order to follow their dreams and passions and achieve what they want to do, and facilitate that. Like, what struck to me is that you were describing how your mum was positive with you, and people sometimes it gets swept under the rug, the importance of positive affirmation, instilling that in children, because naturally a lot of children have a lot of self-doubt, and it's important to recognize that and try to keep their confidence high, because cricket, there's a lot of ups and downs, I can assume. So it's always important to keep that confidence high and that self-belief regardless of what the results are, because you don't want your emotions to be going along with the results that you get. It should be somewhat consistent regardless of the end product as well. And I was just curious, like you mentioned, you interacted with sports psychologists. So what was the most important learnings that you've gathered whilst interacting with sports psychologists that have really influenced your game to another level?
Super question, and so many, and probably a lot that once you obtain knowledge and have that knowledge, you sort of forgot that you've had to learn it at some point. So there's probably a lot of stuff that I will take for granted and won't necessarily bring up, but some fairly some stuff that's fairly common knowledge, I guess, is just the importance of staying present. And that's an easy thing to say and to talk about, but such a difficult thing to do. I think if we could all stay present in our lives, I know for one, definitely our cricket performances for all of us would be significantly better. Like, I would say the majority of the time that we're either dismissed or bowl a bad ball or drop a catch or something, some negative outcome in cricket, it's generally going to be because there's an element of us that is focused on the future or worried about what's happened in the past. So I think that's been a real key for me, is striving to find routines and processes to be able to stay present as best as possible. And one question that I had with one of the sports psychs that I've worked with was, he would get me to ask myself, what do I want right now? Like, just answer that question myself. So what do I want right now? So you're in the middle, it's the 13th over of a T20, you're chasing 200, the team's on 120. It's like, okay, well, I want 80 runs in 7 overs. So what does it require for me to do that? So what do I need right now, or what do I want right now? And then what do I have to do to achieve that? And it's just sort of, it sounds so simple and so basic, but it's quite a nice way, rather than sort of panicking in the heat of the moment, it can sort of dial it right back to, oh, okay, well, that's actually only 12 and over. So I can score 12 and over by hitting one boundary and over. So the other 5 balls are the over. I just need to get bat on ball, run hard. My partner might hit the odd 4 or 6 as well. So I just think that basic question, and it applies to all game situations. Be it a red ball game, if the ball's swinging and nipping around, what do I want right now? It's okay, I need to be here in an hour or two's time when hopefully the ball's not swinging as much, or hopefully the bowlers are a bit more tired, or the bowler's lost his rhythm, or whatever it may, or the wicket's flattened out, whatever it may be. So I just think that's a pretty important question to keep coming back to. And that's probably one example amongst heaps that I could think of, that I've been lucky enough to have exposure to a number of really, really successful sports psychs that have helped me along the journey.
I've listened to many greats of the game. I know Justin Langer for sure, but I think Matthew Hayden to an extent. They talked about mindful meditation, like Justin Langer did it like every morning for like, I don't know, decades and decades. So I'm just curious, like you mentioned processes and staying present. Do you do things such as mindful meditation, or do you have other processes, or it could be even visualization to an extent where you're prepared for certain scenarios and you visualized it and you have that self-belief to be able to tackle it on the day? to stay prepared. So do you have any sort of processes in place in order to help you to keep and stay present?
Yeah, I think it's a crucial aspect of not only sport but of life, that is the ability to stay present. And yeah, I practice mindfulness every day, not for a huge amount of time, and they're usually just guided meditation from apps that are out there. Yeah, the night before games, I'll visualize. I've got a pre-recorded sort of sound clip, I guess, from a sports psych, and it just sort of talks me through a situation or a scenario of going out to bat, and then there's some periods of silence that allow me to sort of work through in my own mind what the upcoming performance might look like. So whether or not those things hinder or benefit me, I don't know. I don't know if they've contributed to my performances or not, but they certainly give me the feeling that I've sort of been there and experienced it, I guess, from the visualization perspective, but also that I've left no stone unturned. I feel like, people talk about it being a mental game. Well, I think devoting that time to the mental aspect or a mental side of preparation is quite important. So yeah, there are a couple of the things that I would do, as part of a sort of a routine, I guess you would call it. Yeah, the outcomes or benefits of them, I guess, is hard to gauge.
And within that guided meditation you're talking about, I assume that would include like breathing techniques or different kinds of breathing techniques.
Spot on.
Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, spot on. So box breathing, for example, which is 4 breaths in, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, that sort of thing, or even just body scans. I basically treat it as an exercise in relaxed concentration, I guess you could call it. The ability to be aware of your thoughts, but not straining so hard and not beating yourself up if your thoughts do go off and get sidetracked. And I think just the same as any skill, the more you practice, the better you get, and the better you get at awareness that your thoughts are drifting. And the first step to change is awareness. So if you're aware that you're drifting off track, you've got the chance to bring yourself back on track. So, and I think that helps, especially in a sport like cricket, where let's say a day's play in red ball cricket goes for 6 hours. That's a lot of time for your body, for your mind to drift off. So the better you are at catching it and ensuring that you come back and focus it on whatever you decide to direct your focus to, I think gives you the best chance of performing your skills to the best of your ability.
And that's a really really interesting point you mentioned in terms of in the context of it could be 4 or 5 day matches, and having to focus for a long period of time, and then having that self-awareness to redirect you in terms of the focus that you need in order to accomplish the task at hand. It doesn't necessarily have to just be bowling, batting itself. It can be obviously bowling, or it could be fielding as well. Fielding can be hours and hours on the field. So obviously your mind can drift. So having that self-awareness is really important. So in terms of that specifically, if you're saying in the context of batting, right, how you gave the example previously, about, if you're on 120 runs and you're chasing 200, and then figuring out, staying present, knowing that, it's only, 10 or 11 runs and over. When it comes to staying present, I would assume that the breathing technique will allow you to first be self-aware that, you're having these anxious feelings and emotions. And there's actually a viral clip recently of Virat Kohli talking about this, and what you also basically articulate about, taking singles and breaking it down to its simplest form, or the most in the mechanical sense, like what's easiest to do, and making it as simplistic as possible for your brain to be like, okay, this is what you need to do in the present moment in order to achieve the goal, if you sustain it in that manner. So it could be even in the case of, I watched a clip of Rian Parag where he was talking about how he's spoken to greats of the game. They're saying that even when someone hits 2 sixes back to back, these greats of the game aren't swayed by the emotions and the adrenaline. So sometimes the breathing technique can help you to stay calm, even though you have these heightened emotions and feelings and adrenaline in order to make the best decision. So have you personally felt that you had to apply those skills in that, not just in a context of 4 days or 5 days, but also in the context of short format, and having too much of an adrenaline rush and having that self-awareness to try and center yourself?
Absolutely. I think it's spot on. And I think I saw the clip of Kohli speaking about this that you referred to. I haven't seen the clip from Riyan Parag. I'd be interested in that. But yeah, I think it's crucial. I think the ability to, when you could call it when your beans are going, I suppose, when you're pent up with adrenaline or, anxious, and be it you might be sort of under or over aroused. I think the key to successful performance is to try and maintain your arousal level in an optimal state, and that's not letting it get too high or too low. So the ability to, again, recognize where you think you are, if that's on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being over aroused, 1 being under aroused. If you perform best, at a 4, 5, 6, 7 sort of a range, knowing what strategies and what things might help get you into that range. So, if you feel under aroused because you're a bit sluggish or a bit tired or whatever it may be, a few short, sharp breaths might help you, up your heart rate a little bit, or a few fast footwork or whatever it may be. You might have some cues that you use to get yourself, a bit more hyped up or in the contest, so to speak. And vice versa, if you feel like you're over aroused, it might be some really slow diaphragmatic breaths where the out breath is longer than the in breath, and that might help to calm the heart rate. Just get you back feeling a bit more level headed and a bit more calm and ready to approach the next ball, which is the most important thing.
I love that whole range that you're talking about, because I don't think it actually gets discussed as much, because obviously a lot of people talk about the adrenaline rush and trying to calm themselves, but sometimes, as you mentioned, someone that's actually sluggish, that adrenaline rush could be good for them because it gets them out of that sluggish state or that sluggish mindset. So they obviously need to put processes in place in order to make sure and ensure that, like, I like the range, like it could be a 7 where they need to be at, and maybe they're always at 3, I don't know. And they need to find ways and have processes where, I know I'm definitely in that zone. That's why I can kind of relate to that, where I have, because this is sort of, I love this kind of topic where I sort of came across it when I was researching about temperaments, archetypes of personalities, and my own sort of fell on the sluggish side. So actually, things such as having hot ginger tea in the morning, waking up early, doing laps around, but not too much. Like all these things are helping you to kind of speed up even your digestion, right, from a sluggish state. So like people don't realize, like, it kind of it sort of plays out, especially even in your digestion, as opposed to not just being sluggish from the mindset perspective. So as long as someone has processes in order to mitigate that, and someone who might be naturally high adrenaline needs to have obviously processes that calm them down a bit more to make the best decision. So I think what you're mentioning is super important, and I guess that's why I started the podcast as well, because these kind of topics need to be talked about more, especially with youngsters as well. So I don't know if you had to add more to add to that, but that's just kind of my ramble in that sense.
No, I think, yeah, spot on, and I agree. I think it's the sort of thing. I look back on my journey, and perhaps as a younger player, and perhaps my own fault. I should have been more curious or more brave to ask better questions. But it's the type of thing that when you're speaking to a great of the game, you wouldn't think about asking them about their breathing processes. Well, I certainly didn't as a young player. I was asking them about their cover drive or their hook shot, or those, what's it like to face Dale Steyn, or sort of more generic type questions, rather than the nitty gritty of it. I think as you mature and as you learn more and more about the game, you understand the importance of controlling the mind. And it's not necessarily a game of skill. It's more of a game of controlling what's above your shoulders. And I think you use the word temperament, which I think is vital in batting in any situation, in any format. Ability to have a good temperament and give yourself the best chance you've got of executing your skills to the highest of your ability.
That's really interesting because I always found many cricketers. I've read actually so many cricketers that talk. Shane Watson's the classic example. Like I've read his books and stuff. He talked about how there was an overemphasis on technique, but not necessarily an emphasis on the mental skills side of the game. And even also random one day I was reading about a Pakistani cricketer. He's a selector now. I forget his name. It's slipping my mind. But he's played a lot of games for Pakistan, and he was talking about that too. Like later down in his career, he then realized about the mental skills side of the game. So I'm just curious on your end. I feel like you sort of resonate with that side of things as well. At what age would you say that it's sort of that understanding of the game kind of took hold of you and sort of informed how you should be playing your game? Because as you mentioned, it seems like from a young age you're asking these greats about their cover drive, etc. But then they got to a point where it's like, oh wait, like there's more to it than just that. So I'm just curious on that and when it started taking effect for you.
Yeah, really good question. And I don't think you've ever, mastered it or got it as such. I think you're always on a progression to learning more and more. The same as any aspect of life, really. To my understanding, is there's always more to learn, and I think being curious is the first step, and that's something I've always prided myself on. And I certainly think I'm far stronger mentally now than I was as a younger player, and that's through a hell of a lot of work and having the good fortune of being involved with some great educators and people that I've been exposed to. Uh, yeah, and I think I do notice at times during games, even I can sort of have moments of satisfaction, really, I suppose, for want of a better word, where I can feel the pressure sort of thing, absorb, realize that, oh, hang on, yeah, I'm under the pump here. And there are probably times that as a younger player, I wouldn't have been able to cope with those circumstances, and I would have made the wrong choice, basically, or made a wrong decision. Whereas I'm sort of able to absorb that pressure a lot better now and able to work my way through situations, and having done that and come out the other side and realize that, if you get 100 or if you have a great day, for example, it's not all smooth sailing. It's not like, oh, I felt fantastic the whole time and I was hitting the ball beautifully and they were bowling exactly where I wanted to, and there was always gaps where I wanted them and all that sort of stuff. Like that might happen, once a season, but the majority of your good performances are where you've had to battle to some extent, where you've had to overcome lots of obstacles, and I think that's a mental challenge as much as it is a skill challenge. So, yeah, I think to try and answer your question, where am I at on that journey? I guess I'm a hell of a lot better mentally now than I used to be, and I hope that in 6-7 years time I look back on this conversation and think, geez, I didn't know much at that time, and because I've learned so much more over that time. So I think that's the joy of the game and why it is such a popular, frustrating, challenging and rewarding game all at the same time, is just because of the vast mental demands that it has.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with cricket, it's not an easy sport, especially with all the variables you have to deal with and trying to perform at your best. I might shift it to because we want to also gauge specifically with your career, your journey, and get insights on that front as well. But I will circle back to processes and your batting approach as well. So I've noticed when I was going through your scorecards, it seemed like from a young age, around 13, 14, 15 years of age, you're always opening the batting. So you can confirm with us if that's kind of what you always did. You sort of always open the batting. If not, and if so, like what made you want to, be an opener? I know that I spoke to Bryce Street, if I recall, and he said that he opened because no one else would open. I don't know if that's a phenomenon around the world or around in Australia. So yeah, like what's your journey with just opening the batting from a young age?
Yeah, I opened the batting lots, and I've always loved opening the batting. I feel like, for starters, you get to face the maximum amount of balls. So that was sort of one thing, I guess, as a kid. And I had a junior coach who was, I still do a lot of stuff with him to this day, and his philosophy on it, on that sort of principle is, well, opening the batting is the hardest because the ball's the newest, the bowlers are the freshest, and the wicket's generally going to be at its most difficult. So you might as well get good at opening the batting, because then you can handle any situation. If you're good enough to open the batting, then you've got the technique to, bat anywhere, basically. And so I'm really grateful that he sort of instilled that mindset in me as a younger player, because that sort of has helped me to be able to adapt to different roles as I've had to over my journey, whether that be, batting 3 or 4 or middle order or finishing games. So, that's probably in a nutshell why I opened the batting a lot as a kid. And I'm certainly very grateful for those opportunities, and I wouldn't do it any other way.
And I was going through your scorecards around season 2006, 2007. I think you're roughly 13 years of age. You played for Claremont, Netherlands. And as I was looking through the scorecard, I saw the names of Stephen Eskenazi, Tim David, and Joel Paris. And you also played against the likes of Cameron Bancroft. So were you close with them? Like, did you know, did you see how good they were? Because obviously they also played high-level cricket too. And what was that relationship there with these kind of players?
Yeah, I know those guys really well. And, I went to school with a few of them, and I've played lots of sport with and against all of those guys, and they're some of my good mates as well. So, yeah, it was, as kids, you obviously, you're not really, as a kid, well, I certainly didn't. As a kid, I was never thinking, oh, I wonder who of these players is going to, turn out to be a superstar, or, play international cricket or whatever it may be. I was just sort of playing. I loved the game, and any opportunity I got to play sport was a bonus in my eyes. And I loved playing with my mates, and nothing's changed to this day. So, yeah, it's been awesome to follow the journeys, I guess, of some really close mates who've got to represent Australia, and and various franchises around the world, and things like that. But ultimately, yeah, my journey's been different, unique, I guess you could say, and I wouldn't necessarily change my own journey. It's been so fulfilling and so satisfying. The number of lessons that I've learned, the number of obstacles I've had to overcome, and I feel like, in some ways, in a weird sort of a way, I feel like my journey's only just starting in some senses. It's been lovely getting back into some franchise cricket in recent times, and having some good tournaments recently, and hopefully that sort of sparks a bit of a second coming or second wind, if you like, in my own journey. And yeah, I'm certainly as passionate as I ever have been about the game, and keen to continue to keep getting better. So it's been an amazing journey, and I just feel so grateful to be exposed to not only so many great players of the game, but also great people, and get to play alongside them and against them and things like that. So yeah, I hope that answers your question to some extent.
Yeah, definitely. Just to give you little background on myself, like I'm Bangladeshi descent, born and bred in Australia. So, I follow all of Australian cricket, Bangladesh cricket. And so when you're playing in the U19 World Cup, which we'll get to in detail, you obviously, well, the reason why Bangladesh got knocked out. And then later on, obviously I followed your career as well. And then I see you play in the Bangladesh Premier League. I'm like, whoa, what's going on here? So you can imagine like how it must be. And it's really interesting that you talk about, second coming in that sense where, through franchise cricket, like I've seen that route from Tim David, for example, right? Like he sort of played for Singapore, he played franchise and then got noticed, and then, Australia called him up again. So it's a really interesting, I guess, journey, how cricket's heading, where many players are now taking that route as well. And that's obviously working out in that sense as well. So I know in season 2008, 2009, I was like, when I was looking through a scorecard, when you're playing for Claremont, Netherlands, you were batting at 3 and you scored 107 of 140 balls, which is amazing. And it says retired, not out. So usually, I don't know if it's like a scorebook error or something like that. Sometimes that happens when we play club cricket. Do you recall that innings? I'm just curious why you're retired, not out.
Yeah, no, I don't recall that specific innings. Maybe a my cricket glitch. I'll go with, but I don't recall wanting to retire ever in batting, let alone when you're on 100. That's generally the best time to bat, when you're seeing them reasonably well and the runs are flowing. So no, I can't recall that particular innings. But I was just thinking before when you were talking about watching the under-19 World Cup against the game against Bangladesh, because I remember that game pretty fondly because there was a mankad in that game. And yeah, it was actually, I didn't realize, but it was Sumya, I think, who did the mankad.
Yeah,
So
it was, yeah.
we played a game against him recently, and yeah, it was quite funny. And Animal Huck Bijoy, who was captain of that under-19 side, I caught up with him and we were able to have a bit of a chat and a bit of a laugh. And yeah, it's nice to see those guys going so well with their journey with the national team. And yeah, certainly some really talented players and good guys. So that was cool to catch up with them.
I might actually go straight to that. It was in the quarterfinal against Bangladesh, and you're batting, and Australia were Australia. You guys were 4 for 33 at one stage, and you're under pressure chasing, and then on top of that, Jimmy Pearson was man-catted by Sumya Saka, as you mentioned. So what must have been going through your mind at that time? Because that's just a crazy situation in a quarterfinal, under-19 World Cup, man-cad, 4 for 33. There must be a lot of things happening. You must have been, going back to adrenaline rushes and anxiousness. That must be the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, like you say, I'm sure there was plenty going through my head, and I probably didn't have the skills that I now do to be able to overcome that with mental skill, should we say. I must have got lucky on that day and, found a way to get through that. But like you say, I'd certainly never seen a mankad before at that time. I mean, they're far more common, shall we say, nowadays, that, a few international players have done them and things like that. And it's sort of become, to some extent, more accepted, I think, in the modern game, rightly or wrongly. But at that stage, yeah, it was quite bizarre. Certainly from my perspective, I'd not seen that before. I was sort of in disbelief and just expecting it to be overturned and for the game to carry on. And then, when he was actually given out, it was like, right, need to pull my finger out and get the boys over the line here. But yeah, really interesting and fascinating to catch up with those people, so many years down the line. That's the beauty of cricket as well, is that you do have relative longevity relative to some other sports. So yeah, it's great to see those guys doing well in their journeys as well.
What did they say after all these years to you when that happened? About when that happened?
There was nothing sort of too specific. It was more just a bit of a laugh and more of a chat about sort of cricket more generally rather than that specific incident.
Yeah, fair enough. And just touching on that game as well, as I mentioned, 4 for 33 Australia, chasing, I think, 172, and you scored 71 of 134 balls, cool under pressure, alongside Travis Head, 44 of 49 balls. I'm sure you guys go way back as well. I think you played, was it the under 17, under 19 carnivals together, all that sort of stuff. So walk us through your emotions at that time, and what approach you had from a batting standpoint, and what sort of conversations were you having with Travis Head in order to get you over the line?
Good question. I can't remember the specific conversations, but Trav, his career has obviously turned out to be remarkable. Arguably one of the best players in the world across 3 formats as well. And he was a really talented player as a younger guy, but probably had a few weaknesses that he's worked on over the journey. And I think it's been interesting to watch his career progress because he's not necessarily a traditional player in terms of a real technician or anything like that. But I think he's just got unbelievable self-belief and ability to maximize his strengths. And, that's probably been a lesson for me that's, taken me a lot longer to learn than it did for him anyways. The importance of making your strengths outstanding, really maximizing your strengths rather than pouring time into minimizing your weaknesses, actually making your strengths super strengths. And I think he's as good an exponent as any of that principle of, he's got an unbelievable cut shot. he trusts his eye. He doesn't get phased. If he has what would be deemed an ugly dismissal and other things that other players would not necessarily be able to overcome, he's able to put them behind him and keep trusting his gut instinct and keep playing with his natural flair. And I think that's a massive credit to him and why he's been so good to watch and had such a successful career and hopefully still got so long to go as well.
It's crazy. Like you see so many different players have different approaches to their game. Like Travis Head comes across as just enjoying his cricket, taking it one ball at a time. Going there and taking it on, as you mentioned, like immense self belief. I'm sure obviously he thinks about his game, but he just kind of comes across like he doesn't have to think too far. Just keeps it as simple as possible as well. So sometimes those aspects are really important to get the best out of players as well. And I'll circle back to season 2009, 2010. According to my maths, you're roughly 16 years old at that time, and you played third grade for Western Suburbs and scored 105. And it looks like it was your second game for them. So would you say it was a step? So you're playing age cricket and you're also playing third grade, and I assume that'll obviously be mixed age group as well. Do you recall that period and what was your learnings and or the sort of coaching you're getting and how you were sort of approaching your batting at that point in time?
Funnily enough, I'm not great with memories of past games and things like that, but I actually do recall that day because I remember playing juniors in the morning and doing quite well. I can't remember exactly what I got. It might have been 100 or maybe just under 100, and then and then Dad sort of racing me off in the car to this seniors game for Western Suburbs and getting 100 in the afternoon. So that was a pretty good day. I think I probably batted for like 120 overs or something in the day, which is obviously impossible to do in any format of cricket because there's not that many overs generally in one day. But if you start juniors at 8 o'clock in the morning, finish at 12, and then you're at seniors by 1 o'clock and it finishes at 6:30 or whatever it was, there was just so many overs to bat. So I do remember that day just from a pure exhaustion point of view. But I think as a young player, I just love the game, and I still do to this day. I just want to play as much cricket as possible, and I think the more you play, the more you learn. You're exposed to different conditions, different opponents. You make mistakes, and hopefully, the more mistakes you make, if you reflect on them appropriately, you're able to just keep getting better and better as a player. So that's sort of been my philosophy right throughout my journey.
At that time, did you have any particular mentor or coach that was guiding you through? It could be the strategy of the game, or even technique, or otherwise.
Yeah, I did. As a younger player, I used a batting coach, and through various sort of points in my journey, I've sort of gone back to, sort of gone in and out of using that guy, and he's the guy I mainly use over the last 3 or 4 years, where I feel like my game has been as good as it's ever been. And so, I think that relationship over such a long period of time, although sort of on and off a little bit at times, I sort of see that as being a relationship that will be there for the rest of my journey, certainly just because, I know the passion and care that he has for, me personally as an individual, first and foremost, but B, also his knowledge of cricket and his passion for the game and understanding of my own game is second to none. And I think that's priceless. And probably something as a young player that I neglected a little bit is, establishing that sort of mentor role, or establishing that person that you can bounce ideas off and, pick up the phone to at any time and talk to. I think probably, in my years from sort of, say, 15 to 22 or something like that, I probably lacked that a little bit, other than my parents who have always been there, but I probably neglected the importance of that mentor sort of a role.
In that same season, you also played in the under-17 national championship against the likes of Bo Webster, Travis Head, and also you played alongside Ash Turner and Cameron Bancroft. And what's stuck out for me is that I think towards the beginning, or at the beginning of the competition, you're batting down the order, and in one game against Victoria, you opened the batting and scored, a mammoth 122 runs, which is no joke at that age. Because I think, you were 16 at the time, playing in the under 17 championship. So, do you recall that innings? And if you can share a few insights about that game.
I've got a vague memory of that game because it was at Park 25, I think, and there's three grounds at that complex. So the national championships were in Adelaide, and I remember, if it's the right game I'm thinking of, I can remember looking across onto one of the other grounds. We were playing Victoria, and Pat Cummins was playing for New South Wales on one of the other adjacent grounds. And I remember just thinking, geez, that guy's bowling thunderbolts. Like, who is this kid, sort of thing. So that was a young Pat Cummins, probably only a year or two before he made his Test debut and earned man of the match honours against South Africa. And what a career he's gone on to have. So that was one of the memories I have of that innings. I also remember getting run out, with about 15 minutes to go before stumps, having batted for near 6 hours, sort of thing, which wasn't ideal, but. Many fond memories of junior carnivals, and you mentioned some of the names of players that I played with and against in those carnivals, and a lot have gone on to represent Australia, which is obviously the ultimate goal. And I've felt a real sense of pride, like watching some of my peers be able to go on and achieve that goal. That really, really fond memories of the junior cricket, and it just feels like a long time ago now.
That's crazy. Like, what was the emotions when you got run out 122 runs? You must have been pissed off.
Yeah,
that age.
Yeah. It's funny, actually. I used to get run out quite a lot as a youngster, just sort of more or less thinking that I was a bit faster than I was. And I remember having quite a few soft tissue injuries as a young guy, and just trying to play through them, and your mind says that you can get there, but your body doesn't allow you to, because you did a hamstring 4 days ago or something like that. But it's amazing how quickly young bodies heal and allow you to get on with playing.
It's interesting. You also mentioned Pat Cummins because in one of the games you opened the batting in the last game against New South Wales and scored 72 runs against Pat Cummins. And Western Australia won by over 200 runs that game, which is a mammoth victory. So what was that experience like facing Pat Cummins? Like you mentioned, you knew him from before, like you watched him, across from the same park. So when you actually faced him, what was that experience like, and how did you go about, negotiating his pace?
Yeah, I obviously remember him being pretty slippery. I think whenever you face quick bowlers, the key is just to remain calm and trust your instincts, because your senses automatically get heightened. So I think you're always a lot more capable than you realize you are. And I think always when you're watching from the side of the ground and things, it can seem a lot more daunting than when you're actually, standing up the other end with the bat in your hand. You're so alert and so focused. It's our bodies are designed to protect us from danger, I guess. So, I think the key with that is just sort of trusting your instincts, and as we were talking about earlier, doing your best to stay present, focus on watching the ball, and try and get a clear look of the ball out of the bowler's hand, and trust your body and all the hard work in practice that you've done to respond accordingly.
So at that age, were you also already preparing against, quick bowlers, or like, with the sidearm facing 140, 145 clicks at, 16, 17 years of age? Like, what was that preparation like? And did you have like processes in place at that age? Because, a lot of cricketers, when they do interviews, talk about, watching it out of the hand and the seam position to try to, pick up length earlier in order to make a better decision. And you obviously talking about just then about the heightened senses at that kind of pace that will help if you stay calm. So I'm just curious about your approach as a batsman, as a young batsman at that point in time.
Yeah, I probably didn't, to be honest, have a lot of those skills in my repertoire. I probably just relied on raw sort of skill, I guess. I didn't sort of have a lot of the knowledge that I now have that's, made me a significantly better player, I think. So, yeah, it's a hard one to comment on. I guess you only know what you know at the time, and I just sort of was doing the best I could with what I knew. I don't think I had any particular, I don't think I was sort of watching the ball out of the bowler's hand with any sort of great process, or I don't think I was doing a pre or post ball routine or anything in particular that, perhaps I'm much more adept at now.
So even the next season, season 2010 to 2011, did play in the under-17 national championship again. You scored 62 against Queensland, 72 against ACT. In one of the teams, Labuschagne was on the other team as well, and Billy Stanley, Mark Steketee. So you're already facing players that are that went on to play domestic cricket as well. But what's interesting as well, it seems like you played first grade that season as well. So I'm just curious, like, what was your experience like, playing age group cricket, and also playing first grade cricket? Because first grade is associated with players of all different ages, or it could be players that played for 20, 30 years, however long it has been, and they're obviously more have much more understanding of the nuances of the game as opposed to age group cricket. So, did you find it a big shift when it comes to playing first grade versus age group cricket?
I certainly did at the time, and I think it was probably my reflection on it is because I didn't go very well in my first year or so of A grade cricket. It was senior men's cricket, and reflecting upon it now, I think a lot of that was down to mentally sort of building it up to be perhaps more of a challenge than just watching the ball and playing the ball. I was sort of playing the name of a lot of those bowlers that I was facing at the time. Whereas when I was playing against guys my own age, I always felt like, oh well, why can't I? Why can't I dominate them, or why can't I do well against them? And I probably didn't have the skills in place at the time to carry that forward to any situation. So that's something that I'm certainly grateful to have developed. Is if I am coming up against a superstar bowler or whatever it may be, ultimately they're just a person bowling a cricket ball at you. There's no reason why my skills can't combat their skills on any given day. But yeah, that's sort of a mindset and approach wasn't a strength of mine, I don't think, in my early days of A grade cricket. So yeah, I did find it really challenging, and something that took a lot of hard work and a lot of ups and downs, I guess, to overcome and get to a point where you feel confident in your own skill set and mindset that regardless of opposition, conditions, game situation, you've got the skills to be able to perform.
And especially in that age group, you're playing against Marnus Labuschagne, who is the number 3 batsman in Test cricket for Australia. So, were you aware of him at the time? What was he like at that time, and how did he play his cricket?
Yeah, I was certainly aware of him. I think everyone was aware of him, mainly because he was pretty loud and pretty energetic and very active and busy, and much how he is today. He's full of energy, and it's been awesome watching his progression as a player, because he was a guy who coming into first class cricket probably didn't nail it initially. Wasn't able to sort of capitalize on some of the opportunities he was given, but he found a way, and I think he had a stint playing for English county side Glamorgan, where obviously some things clicked, and he's been pretty remarkable ever since. And obviously with everyone's journeys, they're going to have some ups and downs, but yeah, his work rate is obviously phenomenal, and he's got a real thirst and hunger for runs and thirst for information and learning about the game, and they're traits that I hugely admire. And yeah, he's a player who I really admire, and I can remember him at that age, just being full of energy and a real competitor, hungry to win, hungry to be involved in the contest in whatever way he could.
And so, even in season 2011, 2012, You made your debut for the Australian under-19 team, which is quite remarkable. I'm just curious with that journey as well. What made you feel like the selectors picked you? Was it just purely on results alone, or they sort of saw your mentality against certain bowlers, or like they kept tabs on you on your it could be your age group cricket, or even in grade cricket and your results at that time. And did the scouts kind of approach your family and keep you updated with how they're seeing things or how you're progressing? I'm just curious how that journey is for a young cricketer, before they get picked to play for Australia under-19 team.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I guess I'm not hugely. I can't comment too much because I wasn't sort of necessarily in those selection meetings as such. But yeah, I dare say I would have been picked on the back of performances I performed pretty strongly in the majority of age group carnivals that I played in, and I think they would have seen me as um, a good young player, and a good future prospect, I guess. And did they keep, the communication was always brilliant in terms of the aspects of my game that they felt needed to be worked on, my strengths that they felt, could continue being maximised. And I don't think my parents would have been too heavily involved in any sort of discussions around that type of stuff. I think it was generally pretty well between the players and coaches and support staff.
And so in September 2011, you made your debut versus India in the triangular under-19 series. So what was, when you found out that you were going to represent the Australian under-19 team, how did you feel personally? Were you, ecstatic, happy? Did you feel determined? Did you have that self-belief, playing higher honors? Like, what was your experience from a personal standpoint at that point in time?
Oh, I was so proud, firstly, because it felt like, well, it was the first time in my life where I'd had the opportunity to feel like I was representing my country. And so, yeah, just immensely proud probably is the first, um, predominant emotion that comes back to me. Uh, yeah, and I don't know. It's hard to comment. I think as a young player, I was probably somewhat naive in a sense that I didn't necessarily realize the sort of the enormity of certain occasions, or it was just playing a game and that I loved, and it felt like a really natural progression. Like I'd always sort of done well in competitions that I played in, and then it was on to the next competition, and that. And I guess the challenge for me was when I got to men's A grade cricket, and found it difficult. Certainly found it difficult in the first couple of years, and that presented different challenges of trying to overcome that. But yeah, probably from a junior cricket perspective, playing underage tournaments and things like that, I didn't think about it hugely. I just played, and every opportunity, every game that I got was just a chance to do well, and that's literally how I treated it.
And was that I would assume that was your first, sort of overseas cricket tour, going to India and playing there. What was that experience like, going to foreign conditions and playing against India in India?
It was amazing. I absolutely love India. I've been lucky enough to play cricket over there on maybe 4 or 5 occasions now, and I've also played in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. I love the subcontinent. I love the passion that they have for the game. I find the people there super friendly. They're very welcoming and keen to help in any way they can. Keen to assist you. Keen to get an understanding of what our conditions are like, what our sort of way of playing is like in Australia. And yeah, I find the subcontinent a really refreshing place to be. I think there's a lot of gratitude there. There's a lot of people are generally very humble, which are a couple of traits that I really admire in people. So yeah, I've loved all my opportunities to play in the subcontinent, and I feel like the conditions in the subcontinent suit me. It's often really hot, humid. I've always prided myself on my fitness, and I feel like that suits me. When it's tough and hot, I think I thrive more so in that relative to other players. And there's lots of spin that gets bowled. I've always prided myself on my ability to play spin, and we obviously spoke about options with sweeping and finding avenues to score against high quality spin bowling. And I absolutely, and every time I go to the subcontinent, I always come back and just I reflect on it. And I think, wow, like I'm so much better as a player now than I was 4 weeks ago, or whenever that trip started. So yeah, it's lots of amazing parts of the world over there.
In that same series, you scored your debut 100 for the under-19 Australia team versus West Indies. So I'd love to hear the sort of approach you had with your batting, because at that time I assumed that the wickets are different to what you're playing or what you're used to in Australia. So what sort of preparation did you have leading up to that game, and what did you feel you did right in that game for you to score your debut 100?
Yeah, if I recall correctly, we were chasing a pretty high total, I reckon, or it was reasonably high scoring game. Like just
365.
yeah, and I remember I had not played in many games that higher scoring. I mean, 360 is a big score in any respect, but I don't reckon I'd played in a game where over 320 had been scored up until that point. So that was sort of an interesting experience, and I remember it sort of just gave me the license almost to just sort of release the shackles and take the game on a bit. I wasn't too sort of fearful of what happened if I got out, because you need 7.5 and over, so you got to get a move on. And I probably had a few things go my way across the course of the innings, but I just remember more than anything just having fun and sort of you walk off at the end of it all, and you've almost amazed yourself in a way that I didn't really know that I was capable of that sort of an innings at that time. I remember, and you obviously have a few innings like that over the journey where you reflect and think, wow, that was pretty special.
Yeah, as you mentioned, you're chasing 365, and Australia scored 349. So West Indies had won by 16 runs. So that must have been a little devastating, falling short from scoring chasing down such a mammoth total. So what was the emotions like at the camp at that time?
I can't recall. I reckon it was a really, really hot day as well from memory. So we're probably just exhausted, and probably, we'd been obviously beaten up in the field a little bit going for 360, but getting 350 in a chase is a reasonable effort, but I can't recall the exact emotions after the game. No.
So what kind of, because after that, not too long after, returned to Australia, there was the under-19 national championship, and you went on quite a run of form. So you mentioned, actually, I recall you said something about being run out a lot. So I think in the first game against Tasmania, you were run out on 68, and then the second game you were run out on 55 against ACT. So it's a bit of a run out situation in that championship, unfortunately. And then after that, against Queensland, he scored 95 and he won by 1 wicket. Must have been a crazy game. And then as well, he scored 78 against South Australia. So it was quite a run of form after that under-19 tour. So walk us through, what do you feel, did you feel like you had a lot of learnings from that series that allowed you to do well in the under-19 championship? Or was there something that you implemented in games specifically in order to help you perform in that particular carnival?
Yeah, I can't recall specifics of the particular carnival, but by the sounds, I threw away a few hundreds. But as I said earlier, I remember getting often times when I've returned from trips to the subcontinent, I feel as if my game has elevated. I feel as if, my footwork's faster and sharper, because it has to be. You get exposed in those spin friendly conditions. If you're not really sharp with your batting, you can't you don't thrive, let alone survive. And I think perhaps there's maybe a tendency that I have, or that Australian players have, when you bat in conditions where the ball's not spinning too much, you can tend to get a bit lazy. Like your scoring options are all over the place, and you can just sort of sit on the ball and wait for a looser ball. Whereas over there, I think you're forced into being more proactive and being more decisive, because if you just sit back, you're gonna get trapped. So there's gonna be a ball with your name on it. You can't afford to be indecisive. So yeah, perhaps that's an element of it. And that I'm sure that would have helped me in that particular circumstance. But that's been a pretty common theme of me going away and playing overseas, and then coming back and feeling like my game's really sharp and gone to another level.
And as well, after that carnival, not too long after, you also played again for Australia under 19, the April 2012, in a triangular series in Australia versus New Zealand, India, and England. And you're captaining that series too. So walk us through, I guess, the qualities that the management saw in order to kind of appoint you as captain, what you feel was your captaincy style at that time.
Yeah, good question. I don't know necessarily what the management saw in me. I know Greg Shipperd was coach of that particular tournament, and he's an unbelievably good coach. He's had so much success, well beyond his times with the Australian under-19s in this particular instance. But he's been coach of the Sydney Sixers for a long time. He's coached Victoria to numerous Sheffield Shields. He was a good player himself. So he was a guy who I really resonated strongly with. He was a guy who looked in depth at the game and sort of didn't leave any stone unturned. He was always really well prepared and always had nice structured sessions and nice structured plans as to how we wanted to approach the game and our cricket, and that was something that resonated with me really strongly. So yeah, I remember having a great relationship with Shippy in that particular tournament, and that probably helped me as well. I think anytime you've got confidence and backing and real belief that the coaches believe in you as a player, I think that helps any player. And a lot of the times when I've performed well is when you just inherently know that the coaching staff trust you and believe in you as a player. And in that particular instance, that was probably the case with Shippy. I hope that answers the question.
Interesting. I didn't know Greg Shipperd was your coach at that time as well, because when I did the interview with Adam Crossway, he was talking about how Greg Shipperd was his coach at Victoria as well. So what is it about his coaching that really helped you? It could be from a captaincy standpoint, your batting standpoint, that really assisted you with your game.
I think is how well prepared he is. Like, he would always be absolutely across some intricacies. So, for example, it might be, okay, boys, today we're playing and there's a 65-metre boundary on one side and 58-metre on the other side, and the wind's blowing towards the 58-metre boundary. And without someone explicitly giving you that information, you might get out to the middle and not necessarily think that through, rather than going, okay, we've got the boundary going to the shorter side, maybe we target that, and to the other side we're looking for our twos because we're hitting it hard along the ground, or whatever it may be. That's a sort of a small example of something that he might be across, or his understanding of or just getting a bit of feedback from off the ground of so and so's looking really upbeat, perhaps it's time to inject him into the game for a second spell. Or he's just had an amazing cricket brain, and I felt like even from a practice standpoint, you could be batting and just have a couple of words with him and he'll be able to pick up on something that just some minor detail, whether it be technical, mental, or otherwise, that just helps you sort of dial yourself back into the best version of yourself. He had a real knack of sort of getting the best out of me, and obviously I've heard him spoken about very highly from a number of other players, and his record speaks for itself.
That's incredible. And in that particular series that we're talking about, Pat Cummins was in your team. And not many have the privilege to say they've captained Australia's Pat Cummins, who's also the current Australian captain. So, what was that experience like?
Oh, incredible! Anytime you've got, the best. He was the best underage bowler there was going around. So when you've got a weapon like that at your disposal, you're pretty lucky. And further to that, Pat is an absolutely terrific bloke. And a great team man. Very funny character. Just an awesome guy. Awesome to have as a teammate. And the only bad thing about him is you got to face him in the nets.
And in July 2012, not too long after that series, the triangular series, you played an under-19 series against Pakistan. So you also versing the likes of Babar Azam and Imam ul Haq. So did you hear about whispers about how good Babar Azam was at that age, and how did you go about handling that kind of batsman?
No, interestingly enough, I hadn't going into that series. I hadn't necessarily, heard what a great player he was. We're obviously aware that coming up against any side, particularly from the subcontinent, they're going to have super talented batters, super talented spin bowlers, in particular, and now fast bowlers as well. So I hadn't necessarily heard about Bubba, but it's been amazing tracking his journey over the years. He's another guy who I absolutely love as a player. I love watching him go about his business. There was probably a period, maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago now, where particularly in one-day cricket, he was just absolutely dominant. It was almost like every time he walked out to bat, he'd get 100. And there's certain things that he does technically that I aspire to do with my own batting. I think he's got an amazing ability to play the ball late. He scores so freely, square of the wicket on the offside, and I just love watching him bat, basically. So I didn't know too much about him at the time, but have loved following his journey since.
When I watched Babar Azam last year at the ground at the MCG when Australia were playing Pakistan, that was the first time I think I was watching him live, and I was trying to really observe his sort of demeanor on the field or when he was batting and his batting approach. It was just unbelievable. You could just feel how hungry he is to score runs and that sort of intent. And it's just really interesting. Like you see that from the great players as well. And I've seen Kohli. Like I was fortunate enough to watch Kohli, kind of scored that famous, what was it, 70, 80 runs against Pakistan in the T20 World Cup. So I was actually at the ground. It was
Oh,
like one of
amazing.
the craziest games ever to watch. Yeah, and you could just see the intent there, like from Kohli. Like it didn't matter what the scoreboard was saying. He's still keeping India in the game and just pulled off those amazing sixes. The one against Harris Raff. So those are the kind of things that you see in the greats. That's that hunger and that self belief. And not too long after as well, in August 2012, was the Under-19 World Cup in Australia. So walk us through, I guess, your emotions leading up to the Under-19 World Cup, and also your captain too. Did you go into that World Cup with a lot of preparation, and how did that preparation look like? What happened in the build up to that World Cup?
Yeah, we were super well prepared as a team, and credit to our sort of coaching staff and the resources that Cricket Australia provided to us. We were able to have a camp in Brisbane before the tournament, which was in Townsville, so not too far away. And we obviously, it was played in sort of home conditions, I guess, being in Australia, even though I don't think any of us really would have played in Townsville before. But yeah, we were super well prepared and super excited, and that team was so well gelled. And a lot of that team would still be pretty good mates with each other to this day. They would have played a lot of cricket with and against each other, be it in state cricket, franchise cricket, or playing for Australia together. It was a really special group of guys and super talented group of guys, but also more importantly, a really hard-working group of guys and sort of a hungry cricket team. So that was an amazing experience to be a part of. I absolutely loved every minute of it. And yeah, some sort of fond memories and good friendships that have lasted to this day.
In that squad you're talking about consisted of the likes of Cameron Bancroft, Jimmy Pearson, Travis Head, as we talked about, Ash Turner, and one interesting person, Sam Hain, who now plays for England. So how does it feel like you're his teammate on the for the Australian under 19 team, especially in the World Cup, and now you're seeing him in rocking the England jersey or the England kit on TV?
Yeah, really interesting one. I haven't kept in touch personally with Haney, but yeah, he obviously moved over to, and he's played most of his cricket at Warwickshire since he's moved over to England. But yeah, he seems to have had a fantastic career. He came back and played either for the Heat or the Hurricanes, I reckon, recently in the Big Bash, within the last couple of seasons, obviously as an overseas player, but played a lot of his cricket in Australia growing up. So in Brisbane, yeah, he was a great player. I think he was an underage player in that side too. So obviously, talented guy, and yeah, a bit like Stevie Eskenazi, has gone on to play most of his cricket, county cricket in England rather than pursuing options to play domestic cricket in Australia.
And in the warm-up game of that World Cup, Australia lost to West Indies, and you mentioned that those, the team was well prepared. So after losing that warm-up game, was there any doubts within the team at all, or was the team kind of treating the warm-up as a warm-up and wasn't really too phased about the result or the outcome?
Good question. I can't recall the specifics of even of the game itself or the outcome, obviously, but we had really good confidence. I mean, we felt like we had a really well balanced team as much as anything else. Really strong batting, great fast bowling, and some good spin bowling options. So if you've got those bases covered, you've got no reason not to be confident, I guess.
And in the first game of the World Cup, it was against England, and you scored a 35 not out in a low scoring affair to win that match against England. And at one point, Australia were 3 for 30. So, do you recall that game and the pressure that you probably might have felt at that time? And how did you go about that game in general?
Yeah, as you say, I think a lot of the games that tournament were pretty hard work for the top order batters, and it was swinging and seaming around, and we often lost a few early wickets, as did a lot of the other sides. So, I played in the middle order that tournament, and as captain, and as any batter, if you lose wickets early, your responsibility is to sort of rebuild and sort of try and get some sort of partnership together with whoever you're batting with, and whatever that looks like at the time, whether that's counter-attacking or whether that's absorbing some pressure for a period of time. I think the more cricket you play, you learn to understand what is more likely to succeed, given the circumstances. And I was probably operating on more sort of more luck rather than, or more intuition and luck rather than skill, and having the database of evidence to suggest that my approach is more likely to succeed than not, which is what I feel the benefit of experience has given me. But yeah, throughout that tournament, I was obviously playing reasonably well, and felt confident in my game, and was just embracing my role as leader, and trying to sort of form partnerships with some really talented other guys around me, and honestly, it was just an amazing experience with some awesome blokes and really good cricketers.
And yeah, so in that tournament, that 35 not out, then in the third game, you scored 36 not out against Ireland. And then we already talked about the first quarterfinal against Bangladesh, where you and Travis Head steered straight home to victory. And so I'll jump to the first semi final against South Africa and the grand final. So in the first semi final versus South Africa, you were up against the likes of Quinton de Kock. What was the planning like as a captain going into that game? Because I think, because I was following that World Cup, and Quinton de Kock was making some headlines even prior to that World Cup. So I'm just curious from a planning standpoint, and I'm not sure if Shippett was the coach at that time. So how did you go about that game in general?
Stuart Law was the coach for the actual World Cup. Another terrific bloke, and a guy who's had an amazing playing career as well. Obviously for Queensland and for Australia, but in terms of planning, my memories are that we didn't focus a huge amount on the opposition necessarily. We were sort of trying to remain confident in our own preparations and, just trust that if we were able to execute our skills, that if we perform well, we're good enough to beat anyone on our day. So, obviously, the Cock, what an amazing career he's gone on to have, and he's dominated all around the world. And he's only just over 30 now, I think, and he's conquered everything, sort of thing. So he was obviously an extraordinary player, super talented. And I do remember him at that particular World Cup, and I can remember playing against him, and he was able to do things that the rest of us couldn't necessarily, just from a raw skill and talent perspective. I think we've seen that on the world stage over the last decade.
And in that game, you were run out, ironically, on 40 runs, but you still able to chase the total down. So, and you're chasing 192. So, what were the emotions like after the game, knowing that you made the grand final of the Under 19 World Cup?
Oh, obviously, over the moon. We set out to win the thing, and to get in the grand final was obviously going to be, the first step in doing that. So, no, we were amazing. It was, really special memories.
And so, jumping into the grand final against India, you scored 87 not out. Unfortunately, fell short of a grand final win that day. So, what was the preparation like going into that particular game? Was there a lot of pressure, a lot of media coverage versing India, so a lot of hype on that front as well? So, walk us through that day, that approach, the sort of media conferences. I don't know if you had to do a lot of that, and then that might have put in some nerves into not just you but the whole team, and how you went about going about trying to win that game.
Yeah, I remember it being a big build up. It was obviously probably at that stage it was the biggest game that any of us had played in our lives to that point. So special day. Unfortunately, we didn't quite get over the line. As you said, I think we posted about 230, and Imrul Kayes, who was the captain of India, played an unbelievable innings. He made about 110 not out, and got them over the line with a couple of overs to spare. But we lost some early wickets, and then we were able to build a bit of a partnership and get a competitive score on the board. We just couldn't defend it, which was devastating at the time. And it's one of those things that you hear about the Australian under 19 teams that have won the tournament, and there's often 10 years down the line a picture of them celebrating or something will come out on social media, which is really cool. So unfortunately we weren't able to be a part of that sort of history, but some unbelievable memories, and the players that have been able to represent Australia off the back of that experience in that particular 2012 team have shown how good of players they are over the years.
And do you recall when you did score that 87, what was your approach on that day, how you went about your business from a strategic perspective? How did you approach your batting that day?
Yeah, from memory, we were about 3 for 30, and so I think Travis Head and I put on a bit of a partnership, and then Ash Turner and I put on a bit of a partnership as well. My approach was just to score as many runs as I possibly could, and try and be there as close to the end as possible. It was basically what I felt my role was in the team at that time, was to take the game deep, give us a competitive total, which at the halfway mark I think we would have taken that every day of the week, that score. As it turned out, we weren't able to defend it, and a guy played an incredible individual innings. I think my approach would have just been fairly simple. Play as low a risk cricket as possible while still putting the bowler under pressure as much as possible, and running between the wickets, all the good basics of one-day cricket.
And in that tournament, you won player of the tournament, and you averaged 276 with the bat. So that must have been a cherished memory when you were announced as the player of the tournament. And walk us through that accolade and how you felt achieving that.
Yeah, really special to be awarded that. that award. And yeah, it was a lot of hard work that went into that tournament, the preparation for that, and obviously, all the everything that you've done as a kid sort of leads up to a moment like that. So it was pleasing to make the most of that tournament, and being in Australia as well was pretty special. Being able to have friends and family able to watch some of the games and follow along and be supportive. So yeah, it was great times, and look back upon it very fondly.
And not too long after season 2012-2013, you made your Ryobi Cup debut. So when you found out about your debut, how did you feel? And unfortunately, again, ironically, you got run out on a duck on your debut, if I recall, if I'm looking at the
Yeah, spot on.
scorecard correctly. So tell us about that situation.
Yeah, it's amazing how that game in particular has been a real over the years was a sort of a really good learning curve for me, because I'd never experienced before where I sort of got out to the middle, and I was so, I guess, overwhelmed by the occasion. I can remember the bowler running in, and I was almost thinking, like, I was so sort of not in a great headspace, I guess is the only way I can describe it. I was sort of thinking, wow, this is incredible. Like, here I am finally, this is what I've dreamt of, playing for Western Australia. Like, I finally made it. And then all of a sudden, bang, like you're walking back to the sheds, and, it's almost like you don't know what's happened. And I'm sure every cricketer or every sports person has experienced that or similar to some extent, where, it just in the blink of an eye, you're out and you're walking back, and you're like, oh, geez, like, what the hell just happened? And so that's been a sort of that was a good reflection piece for me. And, something I often do nowadays is, if I'm feeling rushed or under the pump, just, the ability to take a few calming breaths and give yourself that 2 or 3 seconds that, might not seem like much, but I think it buys you an incredible amount of, be it time or be it, just headspace to be able to refocus on what's actually important, rather than sort of getting too caught up in, the enormity of the occasion, or how special something is, or, the negatives that might come from failure, or whatever it may be. All these sort of tangents that our brains naturally lead ourselves on as human beings. The ability to overcome that with, with a few simple breaths is crucial.
And also, when you're playing for Western Australia, the second 11, you're playing alongside Shaun Marsh. So how was that experience like? Being playing alongside Shaun Marsh, which I'm sure was making a lot of headlines at that time with his performances.
Yeah, Shaun's an incredible guy. What a player! He's a really he's a gentle guy. He's very supportive, very encouraging. The sort of guy who, when you're on his team, you walk a bit taller because Shaun's on your team. He's fantastic person. Comes from a wonderful family, and obviously a very successful cricket family. But beyond that, they're amazing people. So yeah, really special to be able to play alongside him. And I was lucky enough to play Shield cricket with him, and have him as my captain in Shield cricket, and share some really good partnerships with him in Shield cricket. And yeah, certainly learn a lot about the way he went about his game. And he was able to, with his experience, he was able to simplify certain situations for a lot of the younger players that Western Australia had coming through at that time.
And I'm aware as well you're good mates with Mitchell Marsh. So was that through being teammates with Shaun Marsh, where you got acquainted with Mitch Marsh, or did you know him from before?
From being teammates and playing against Mitch, played against him in school cricket. I played with him, or I was in the squad with him once I got to the Western Australian squad. And again, an amazing character, very funny guy, doesn't take himself too seriously, and has an amazing knack to be able to make others feel comfortable being themselves. I think is a real skill of his. And obviously the world's seen what an incredible talent he is, with a cricket bat in hand. And hopefully we can watch him smack it around to all parts for many years to come. But yeah, he's a special guy, and really lucky to call him a good friend.
In season 2013-2014, you also made your first class debut for Western Australia in October 2013. So you were making a debut against Victoria, facing the likes of Peter Siddle, Scott Boland, and John Hastings. So when you found out about your debut, what was going through your mind? How did you feel as a cricketer? I'm sure, that was a dream come true, essentially. And on top of that, you're facing such a classy bowling attack. So what was your sort of preparation, the lead up to that game? Because in the fourth innings, you also batted number 4 and hit an important 44, 4 runs that day or that match. So yeah, I'm just curious in general how that match panned out and your preparation, the lead up, and how you felt making your debut.
Yeah, obviously a bit to unpack there. Hugely proud moment making my debut for Western Australia. I remember Sean Marsh presented my cap that day. The game was at the MCG, which, as a kid, I think I was 18 or 19 years old or whatever I was. And, you dream about playing at the MCG, but I certainly didn't ever think that it would necessarily eventuate. So yeah, really proud moment to be able to represent my state. And, as a kid, I'd grown up dashing off after school to get the train and the bus to the WACA, which was, 40 minutes away, just to catch the last hour or hour and a half of, of Shield games and things like that. So it was all I'd ever wanted to do was, represent my state. And now that I had that opportunity to do that was, a really, really proud moment. And to be able to contribute in that game I remember batting with Marcus North for a couple of hours, who, had an amazing season that year. He sort of reinvented himself as an opening batter and was able to sort of lead Western Australia really well. So to share a partnership with him. And I remember at the conclusion of that game, just thinking to myself, like, yeah, I can do this. Like, I've got what it takes. I guess you don't know that until you are exposed to the level. And I've certainly gone through plenty of ups and downs since that game. But yeah, my sort of overriding emotions were, pride, gratitude for how lucky I was to get the opportunity to represent my state, and then, hunger for more, I guess, just because it was so much fun.
And did you have any particular strategies when you were facing the likes of Peter Siddle and Scott Boland and them? I don't know if the wobble ball was probably as prevalent at that time as opposed to maybe afterwards. But, people talk about Peter Siddle was the one that kind of brought it from England and sort of made it more widespread. I don't know if it was widespread at that time, but how did you go about, dealing with that kind of bowling attack?
Yeah, I mean, those guys are high class bowlers. I think James Pattinson might have played in that game, or if not a couple of games later, that I played in against Victoria. And, they were a high class outfit, particularly, and their batting lineup was amazing as well. I remember they had Chris Rogers, David Hussey, Cameron White. They were Rob Quiney. They were stacked with, international players effectively. So, as a kid just starting out in my first class journey, I was pretty overawed and I felt out of my depth. And but I think that's only natural, really. And I just found a way to try and do as best I can and just soak in the moment, basically, and learn as much as I can. And I don't think, looking back on that now, I mean, I certainly did feel underprepared, I guess. But I guess I don't think there's any way around that. I think you've almost got to, at some point, you're going to get thrown in the deep end, and you've got to find ways to learn what you would do differently. And I certainly took plenty of learnings from my early first class games.
And in season 2015-2016, you were playing the Marsh Cup, but it was really interesting is that you're playing for Cricket Australia 11. And I do recall this, where I think it was like a new team they sort of introduced because Marcus Harris, I think, was in that team, and the likes of Josh Inglis as well. So I'm sure that Cricket Australia would have identified these kind of young talent and sort of put a team together in order for them to play more games and to verse high quality attacks. Because I know New South Wales was stacked at that time, and Victoria. So I'm just curious. Like, I'd like to get your insights about, when you were a part of Cricket Australia 11, how that team came to fruition as a concept.
Yeah, I remember that that phase where the Cricket Australia 11 was playing in the Marsh One Day Cup, and I was a beneficiary, I guess, because I wasn't selected in Western Australia's squad of 13 players, for example, but I was in the next best sort of rung of players, and we all formed a team to compete as the Cricket Australia 11. And for me, that experience was priceless. Like getting to play. I think I played 10 games across a couple of seasons, against the other states in the one-day competition, and it was in a tournament-style competition. Just like a lot of the sort of competitions around the world internationally. So unbelievable exposure. And I think something that a lot of the good young players really benefited from at that time. Like I know Marcus Harris played in those teams, Josh Inglis, Mitch Swepson, a number of players who went on, and I'm sure look back on their time in that side very fondly, and those opportunities sort of fast-track their development.
And what was the biggest learnings that you took away from being a part of the Cricket Australia 11?
Lots. I think, certainly from a mental perspective, the sort of gaps that I had in my game, and that, I needed to find a way to worry about just playing the ball rather than playing the person. Which I think as a younger player, I was guilty of pretty regularly, to be honest. Which we've already touched on earlier. And I think a number of aspects, finding ways to be able to score more freely off spin bowling, for example, not getting bogged down in those middle overs of one-day games, and just watching the good players and how they go about constructing an innings. Like we played against some stacked New South Wales teams. I remember Steve Smith got, a big 100 one game against us, and just how effortlessly he manipulated the bowling. He didn't seem to take too many big risks until later on in the innings, but he was still striking at over 100 just because he's got the ability to score off such a high percentage of balls. So, that sort of an approach gives you the opportunity to go, okay, what do I need to go away and work on so that I'm able to emulate that the next opportunity I get.
I might stick to Cricket Australia 11, like even in season 2016-2017, because in that season you scored 86 runs versus Queensland. It was a mammoth effort. And on top of that, in a different game, I think the one you're probably referring to, you scored 75 runs, but lost to a very strong New South Wales team by 4 runs, which is incredible, with the likes of Doug Bollinger, Pat Cummins, Nathan Lyon, Ben Dwarshuis, Gurinder Sandhu, Ed Cowan, Curtis Patterson, because that's a pretty stacked team. So do you recall those games as well, and what was going through your mind as a batsman?
Yeah, I do remember that particular game. It was at Hurstville Oval, and I reckon we were chasing a decent total. And I think Ryan Gibson, who was actually a New South Wales guy originally, ended up coming over to South Australia as well, and we sort of trained and played together a bit in South Australia too. But, he was a good young player, and I reckon we put on a bit of a partnership and got us close. But again, we probably both got out at the wrong time, back end of the game. Whereas, you'd like to think now with a bit more experience and a bit more nous to take the game deeper, that, they're the sorts of games that, you back yourself to finish, with a bit more experience and a bit more nous as to how to go about that. But as a young player, you probably look at the scoreboard and think, geez, I've got to knock them off, now, sort of thing, and panic and maybe take a risk or two too many, and you come unstuck. But that's why those competitions, I think, are so great, is because you get exposed and you make mistakes that you're then able to reflect and learn on.
And in that same year, you actually captained Cricket Australia 11 against Pakistan, which is really interesting. So you're playing against the likes of Mohammad Amir, Babar Azam, Yunus Khan, Misbah Haq, Mohammad Rizwan, and you're playing alongside Will Pukovski, Cameron Green, Jason Sanger, so incredible young talents at that time as well. So what do you recall from that experience as well? And did you Was it like a homecoming with Babar Azam, like playing him in again, that sort of situation?
Yeah, interesting. Coming up against Bubba again a few years down the line. Yeah, again, any opportunity you get to play against world class opposition, I just think is invaluable, and those Cricket Australia 11 opportunities, no doubt help shape the player I am today. Albeit you don't necessarily see the fruits of those opportunities straight away, or those learnings come in different sort of at different times for different players. But yeah, I think again watching guys, I remember Shoaib Malik, I think, was a part of that game as well, and watching him play spin was incredible. And and when you get to play against guys firsthand and you see how they play, how hard they hit the ball, and then all of a sudden you watch them on TV and it's so much more relatable. Again, another, so many of these sort of games that you're bringing up, I look back on, and I think, yeah, no doubt there's heaps of learnings that were taken away.
Was there any? Did you have time to talk to these kind of players and have those learnings, or spend quality time with them to talk to them about strategies of the game, for anyone in Pakistan in particular?
Yeah, generally after these sorts of games, you do get the opportunity to sit down with the opposition. I can't remember specifically in that game if we were given that opportunity. I know in some of the Cricket Australia 11 games, for example, we were able to sit down after the game with the state and just sort of review the game a bit and see if they had any feedback for us. And often it can be quite simple stuff that you have heard before, but when you hear it from an experienced player, it sort of reinforces the message and allows you to go away with the confidence that you're on the right track.
And at that time, you, as I mentioned, you're playing alongside Will Pucovski, Jason Sanger, Josh Inglis as well, Will Sutherland, Cameron Green, Riley Meredith. So very talented crop of players. Was there any particular player that kind of stood out for you, whether it be a batsman or bowler, as a young talent at that time?
Josh Inglis is a guy who was, he obviously is very talented, but is a underratedly hard worker. And that's been really nice to see him sort of get the fruits of his hard work. I know he did a hell of a lot of work on his fitness, on his strength and his ability to bat long periods of time, but he's always been really talented in terms of his ability to hit the ball 360. He was a really good exponent of reverse sweeps, of scoop shots, of laps, of hitting the ball inside out over extra cover. He's always had a great pull shot, so it's been nice to see those skills come to the fore during his stints so far with Australia across all three formats.
And circling back to the previous season, in the Sheffield Shield for Western Australia, you were captained by Sean Marsh, and you made your debut 100 in the fourth innings to draw the match, and you're also man of the match against a very strong Victoria side. So I think you have a bit of a love affair with Victoria and playing well against them, against the likes of James Patterson, Peter Siddle, Scott Boland, and Fal Ahmed. So like what was going through your mind as a batsman when it comes to strategy in that game?
Yeah, well, I think we were probably outplayed for the majority of that game. So that day 4 was just an opportunity to try and bat the whole day, basically, which, I think I was virtually able to do. I might have got out just towards the end there, actually. But yeah, such a good learning, being able to bat and go through the different waves of emotions that you do, batting for a whole day's play at Shield cricket, particularly against such a strong bowling attack. That was amazing as a 20-year-old guy to be exposed to the ups and downs, I suppose. And they're the sorts of innings that you can reflect on, in later years when you're going through hard times in a partnership or whatever it may be. And you just think, no, I've been here before. I know that if I stick to certain processes, or if I stick it out for long enough, I'll come out the other side of it and start scoring a bit more freely, or finding ways to rotate strike more easily or whatever it may be. So yeah, those sorts of innings are pretty important, I think, for someone's career, particularly early on, to give you the confidence that despite whatever challenges you might be facing in the middle, you can overcome it, and that you will go through ups and downs. But if you're able to stick at it, you come out the other side.
Yeah, and because in that particular game, the target was 390. So batting day 4-5 and trying to either bat for the draw is obviously one of the toughest situations to bat in. So I remember I was just out of curiosity doing some digging of some greats in the game when it came to their averages in the fourth innings, and you'd be surprised like how many greats of the game actually didn't score as much in the fourth innings as opposed to the kind of batting average overall. So it's definitely like, a test of character, patience, resilience. So what advice would you give when it comes to, a young cricketer or any cricketer to be able to, bat through that period? Is it just like a mental game that you personally try to, hone in on and try to keep the game as simple as possible? Whether it's, whatever bowler you're facing, or is it about being strategic, in particular, targeting different bowlers or being very defensive in certain situations? So what kind of recommendations and tools would you advise to have for players to be able to battle that kind of pressure situation?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and probably not something I put a huge deal of thought on specifically in terms of playing, being a great fourth innings player as such. I think I probably just have always tried to perform in whatever situation is required of me. But I think important thing in fourth innings chases is that, well, for starters, the whole game is set up, so roughly what the wicket's like. You know what the bowlers are like because you've faced them already in the second or first innings or whatever it may be. And so I think it's just the ability to sum up the conditions in front of you, sum up what's required. So, do we have a chance of winning the game? That's obviously priority number one. If so, how do we go about that? How do we give ourselves the best chance to win the game, as comfortably as possible, whether that be keeping wickets in hand for late in the day after tea, and also just realising that there might be a time in the game where it's easier. Like, is the wicket gonna deteriorate? So it might be easier to score earlier in the day. Is it going to be easier to score against the ball while it's harder and newer, or is it going to be easier to score once the bowlers are worn down a bit and the shine's off the ball? So many factors come into that, and I think just your capacity to sum up the situation of the game comes from experience and being exposed to those conditions more often.
And just kind of expanding on what you mentioned, because in that same innings and even in a later season, you scored 2 double centuries in the Toyota second 11 for Western Australia, a 207 not out versus ACT. And in November 2017, you also scored 200 versus ACT New South Wales Country, opening the batting with Josh Philippi. So I guess for the audience, like, we see a lot of great players, especially in international cricket, scoring daddy hundreds, big hundreds. And in that case, being able to score, double centuries in, high level of cricket. What would you boil that down to? Like, how would you yourself what are the processes you put in place in order for you to be able to, score those daddy hundreds?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I saw a snippet of Crossweight speaking about this, and just changing your perspective as to almost never being satisfied. Essentially, a way I like to think about it is, if you get to 100 not out, for example, is it going to be easier for you to go from 100 not out to 130 not out, or is it going to be easier to go from 0 to 30 in your next opportunity to bat? And I think anyone who's played the game realizes that once you're in, that's easier to bat than getting started the next time around. And so I think just sort of having that in the back of your mind, like, well, while I'm in, I might as well cash in and make the most of it, rather than, relying on my capacity to get started again next time, sort of thing. So that's something I try and sort of remind myself of if I feel myself getting getting carried away or getting ahead of myself, so to speak. I always try and rein it back in to think, well, hang on, could easily get a duck next innings when you walk out the bat, and then all of a sudden, 100 and a duck, you're averaging 50. Well, if you've got 180 not out, and then you get a duck, you're averaging 180 or whatever it may be. So, I think it's important to not set your expectations on an outcome. I think something I've got a lot better at over the last couple of years, and where my run productivity has been better than ever, has been I judge myself on my process. So, how often, for starters, how well have I prepared during the week, or in the preseason and during the week before the match? So how well have I prepared, or how well have I prepared for that tournament? How well do I understand the opposition bowlers? How well do I understand the pitch conditions that I'm going to face? How well do I understand my own preparation and what I've needed for that particular circumstance? But then also in game, how well am I sticking to my processes? So am I going through my batting routine? Am I going through my pre-ball, post-ball routine? Am I, finding ways to recognize times when I might be drifting ahead and getting ahead of myself, or recognize when I might be, getting caught up in what's happened the previous ball or the previous session or the previous over or whatever it may be. So I'm actually judging myself on the processes rather than the outcome. And if I analyze an innings after a game, for example, I'm not necessarily going, oh yeah, I made 150, excellent, good job. I don't judge myself on that anymore. I'm sort of judging myself on, how well dialed into the processes that I'm looking for was I, because I know the closer I am to those metrics, the more likely I am to, have a successful game from an outcome perspective.
I mean, yeah, exactly. It reminds me of, Sean Watson talks about not being too influenced by the results because there's too many variables in cricket. You can get out to a good ball, but then many times you can just be unlucky or things happen you can't control.
The A factors and the B factors.
Exactly, yeah, and
Yeah.
like that, you don't want to be swayed by things you can't control, right? Because that'd be a strange way to kind of determine how good of a player you are, right? Like if your results or your score is being dictated by a situation that's very unlucky to be experiencing as a player, like you don't want to kind of hyperfixate on that. So, as you mentioned about your process, I think that's a great reminder for all cricketers to just hyper focus on that and stay hungry and just continue that process and have that self-awareness as well. So I guess it's a journey, and having that self-belief definitely helps in that sense too. And I know in the next few seasons, like you have a very interesting tours, and for example, you played the Big Bash. You also played versus England for the Western Australia 11, and you faced the likes of Jimmy Addison, Stuart Broad, Wokes, and even Root and Bairstow playing that game. So do you recall that in season 2017, 2018, we had to face all those bowlers like Jimmy Addison and Stuart Broad?
Yeah, I remember. What an amazing opportunity, because as a young guy, you grow up watching, these English players and you think of them as, the arch enemy, so to speak. And then all of a sudden you get the opportunity to be out there playing against them. That was amazing. And at the WACA, obviously my home ground that I've grown up watching loads of cricket at, and and then you're going to be watching these guys playing in the Test match, later in the week, sort of thing. So that was really special. I think I got about 40 odd that game, and I got out to Jimmy Anderson actually, and I can remember thinking, in the couple of overs before that, this guy's, nothing that I haven't faced before type thing. And then all of a sudden, like, you let your guard down for a second and bang, like he, bowls a leg cutter and you're nicked off and you're walking off and you're thinking, geez, like, I'm one of 700 blokes who's made that mistake before, sort of thing. Like, I just think it sort of made me aware of A, the skill of a guy like Jimmy, and B, how how switched on and how level-headed you've got to remain at that top level. You can't, one lapse in concentration or one sort of, you let your guard down for a second and bang, you're gone.
And that season as well, he played Sheffield Shield and he scored 57 in the first innings, and in the last innings, he scored 98 to guide your team to a draw and win man of the match. So there's a knack of, I guess, fourth innings or second innings scores that you seem to either help your team or guide your team to a draw, guide them to victory. So do you feel like you've just, because like that reminds me of the innings you played in the Under-19 World Cup. So it's just sort of that inbuilt belief at that point in time when you, in that situation where it's like, oh, I've been there, done that. It's a bit of like muscle memory, which allows you to be able to, for example, in this case, score a 98 to guide your team to a draw.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of my personality, probably as much as anything else, that sort of thrives on being under pressure, if you want to call it, or thrives on sort of well, there's no other alternative. Like, it's got to be me or nothing. So I'll stick my hand up. It might as well be me, sort of thing. I don't know, and that's probably a trait inbuilt as a kid. Nothing to do necessarily with cricket as such. So yeah, that's probably where a lot of I've always loved run chases, for example. I really enjoy batting last, kind of thing, when you've got all the chips on the table, so to speak. Exactly what's required, and then it's just up to trusting sort of your brain, or call it like the calculator or the formula to get you there. And that's something I've always thrived on as a player, is being able to navigate the risk required, and just sort of juggling that, dialing that up or down depending on how you see the situation, how many overs certain bowlers have got left, how you see the pitch playing, what batters you've got in your order to come, what you feel their strengths may be, and just sort of analysing all that stuff probably going on in the subconscious, and then refocusing on just the ball coming down as it comes down, or as the bowler's at the top of his mark.
This might be a bit of an unpopular opinion, but because obviously when it comes to playing cricket, there's all the different types of personalities that play cricket, and some people, like, obviously, yeah, like statistically, doing well in scoring a big amount of run in chases and pressure situations is a rare feat or achievement, but it does actually suit some personality types, essentially. Like, I know so many players, like, normally if they're just batting first innings, they'll throw away the wicket, whatever. But then whenever there's a pressure situation, whenever there's a situation they need to take the team to victory, they suddenly become a different batsman. And I think it's psychologically like wired in a way where it's like it actually helps them to focus, as opposed to just when a situation is not really there. So I guess for that person as well, they would need to put processes in order for them to be able to feel like they need to be intense in all situations. And funny enough, like, Shane Wilson sort of talks about that through, like, I think he talks about how he tries to engage with the opposition plays in order for him to feel focused. So I guess for them, it's about trying to find ways or means in order to try to have that intensity at all times, not necessarily being dictated by the situation in order to have that intensity. And I feel like, yeah, for example, we all know how good the likes of MS Dhoni or Kohli playing when it comes to chasing big targets. But I think it does suit their personality as well. You can just say, by the way, either they're, more hyper focused, or they feel like a sense of responsibility that they want to take on top of their shoulders that allows them to flourish and score runs. So I think everyone's very, very different in many ways. And so, it's not just uniquely based on, oh, look how amazing they are. It's more so, oh, maybe this situation actually suits that sort of personality as well. So I don't know if you agree with that, but that's just sort of what I think about
Spot
this.
on. I think you're spot on, and I think it comes back a little bit to our point earlier around arousal levels. Like perhaps those guys that you used in that example, like a Dhoni or a Kohli, their arousal level in a high pressure chase, for example, is at a 7 or an 8 kind of thing, and that's where they thrive. Whereas perhaps on their average performance. And those guys are not great examples of this because their performances are always pretty consistent and strong. But perhaps someone else not as adept as those guys would, if they're batting first or there's no pressure, their arousal level's down, at a 2 or a 3, and therefore they're not up where they need to be to get the most out of themselves. So I think that's where those mental skills or questions to check in with yourself to go, what do I want right now? Okay, how do I make that happen? Or what do I need to do to make that happen? I think that's where that can help players stuck in that sort of a rut.
And touching on that, speaking of Arousal, you also made your Big Bash debut that season. What's really interesting is that you played for Perth Scorchers and the likes of Mitchell Johnson and Tim Bresnan. And that season, I'm pretty sure you'd also had to face Doug Bollinger and Rashid Khan at some point. So what was the experience facing all of those bowlers, and how was it like, playing Mitchell Johnson in the nets and also facing Rashid Khan in the middle?
Yeah, two very good bowlers in different respects. Obviously, Mitchell Johnson, just raw pace, and he also had a really sort of awkward angle, I found. Like, I found a lot of left armers, the ball sort of comes back into you, whereas Mitchell Johnson was sort of almost slanting across you a little bit, maybe due to his slingy action. And also, he didn't sort of seem to charge in very quickly, and then all of a sudden, it's just this catapult that's on you quicker than you know what's happened. So even I remember facing him in the nets, and he was just sort of warming up a few looseners before the session started, and he's bowling off 1, 2, or 3 steps sort of thing, and it felt like he was as quick, if not quicker, than all the other bowlers, even just his warm up balls. So yeah, obviously a really strong, powerful guy that was able to dominate world cricket at his best. And the other great thing about Mitch was he was such a good teammate, and he was able to share. He was really open in sharing how he felt like you could improve your game, and he was really passionate about the game itself, and really interested in helping younger players like myself at the time. So, I remember asking him, how would an AB de Villiers, or one of the greats of the game, how would he play that sort of ball? And he was just really open in sharing feedback on that type of stuff. So, yeah, terrific guy that Western Australia was lucky to sort of inherit, I suppose, for the second half of his career.
And how's it like facing Rashid Khan?
Yeah, Rashid was. I don't think I'd ever faced a spin bowler bowl as quick to that point. And it was lucky I faced him at Optus Stadium, where there's not a huge amount of spin, and we were chasing a really low score. So I wasn't under sort of scoreboard pressure necessarily to score quickly, but so I could sort of have a look at him, I guess, and take more of almost like a 50 over game approach, where 4, 5 and over, just picking up the singles was gonna get us over the line. So yeah, that was quite satisfying, being able to I guess get through his spell and carry the Scorchers to a win on that particular day.
And before I jump into the theme of T20 and Big Bash, because you also played in the NPL and the BPL recently, I can't skip over the fact that you had scored a mammoth 167 runs with a partnership with your good friend Mitch Marsh. It was a 185-run partnership in the Sheffield Shield. So I assume that probably would be one of your most memorable innings within Sheffield Shield. So walk us through that day and your approach and how it was like batting with Mitch Marsh for that duration of the game.
Yeah, arguably one of my fondest cricket memories from a sort of a personal respect, I think, that day. Batting with one of my good mates, and I think I came in late on day 2 of that game, and got through a couple of overs. Mitch was on 40 or 50 not out probably at stumps, and I just got to the wicket, and then we virtually batted the whole of day 3 together. I think Mitch got out just after tea, and I was able to bat right the way through, and then came out on day 4. So I ended up actually batting on the same innings on 3 separate days of that fixture. So very fond memories, and in particular the partnership with Mitch. That's one of the joys of cricket is you get to share time, and they're competitive times, right? Like, it's certainly not easy, and the opposition's coming for you and things like that, but you're able to share in and amongst a competitive environment, some amazing memories that you can talk about for years to come.
And so jumping to season 2024-2025, you played in the Nepalese Premier League, so the NPL, and you were in the same team as Shikhar Dhawan for your team, Kanali Yaks. So what was that experience like, playing with such a world-class player, Shikhar Dhawan, and having that experience?
Yeah, as you say, proper rock star and world-class player. He was, an amazing, just a classy player, and made it look pretty effortless at times. But it was also a really good learning curve for me in the sense of watching him go about his business, and he's obviously played years and years of international cricket and franchise cricket all around the world by this point. And just watching the way that he prepared himself, and it wasn't necessarily, the stereotypical warm up or whatever it may be, but he was ready to go when he got out there. You could tell he was dialed in, and he might seem like really really relaxed, chilled out sort of a customer, but when it came his turn and his involvement in the game, whether it be standing at first slip, he took a couple of really nice catches off our spinners at slip, or facing the first ball of the innings, whatever it may be, he was dialed in. And again, lovely guy, very, very relaxed customer. And it was cool to play with him and cool to learn from him in that environment. And also just the confidence that he has and that he instilled in the rest of us to, don't be afraid to stick your hand up and be a match winner. And that was his big messaging, is that, don't underestimate your own capacity to influence the game. And if everyone has that mindset, then generally good things will happen.
And how did you find the conditions in Nepal? Like, were they similar kind of your stereotypical subcontinent pitches, or is it, because it's T20, obviously, was it on the flatter side anyway? So what were the conditions like, and what sort of preparations did you do in the lead up to that tournament?
Those wickets were tough to score. They were very very favoured to finger spinners. So a lot of, most teams had 2 or 3 left arm off spinners because, if you could bowl accurate finger spin, the wicket was going to take care of the rest for you, essentially. Balls were keeping low, balls were spitting. So very challenging conditions, particularly from a batting perspective. And a lot of those games were reasonably low scoring, but, that presents different challenges. All of a sudden the pressure goes onto the bowling unit in a way, because, if a batting team knows that, well, if we can scrap our way to 140, 150 here, we know we're right in the game. So, again, I love the tactical challenges of the game, and and often that's their mental challenges as much as they are skill challenges. So, that was an awesome experience. Again, Nepalese people are so friendly, so caring and giving of their time, and I really embraced the culture while I was over there, and I embraced the challenges of the cricket. And there's a lot of good young players and a lot of good cricketers in Nepal. I think if they can continue to expand their conditions in particular, and by conditions I mean access to suitable turf training pitches, access to matches against stronger oppositions and things like that more regularly, I think their cricket will only go from strength to strength.
Yeah, definitely. They've taken the world by storm in the recent sort of T20 World Cup, and also in other tournaments as well. So they're dangerous team as well. I think one of the players hit like 6 sixes in. I remember in one of the games as well. So in a different tournament. So they've got so much potential and talent. And in the second game, you hit a 66 of 49 balls. So what was your game plan? Was it kind of pulling out the sweep shots? Was it kind of the blueprint of Mike Hussey? How did you approach that game and to score those runs?
Yeah, that was on a turning track, and so I certainly did use my sweeps quite a bit. If I recall correctly, I reckon that game was against Sandeep Lamichane's team. So he's obviously played a bit of cricket in the Big Bash, and in the IPL, he's played franchise cricket all around the world. He's a superstar. So that was cool to be able to get to face him, and he was captain of his franchise, Bharatnagar. So yeah, for me, it was just an opportunity to show my skills, I guess. And, I played the game as I saw it. If I felt like the wicket was spinning, I was probably more inclined to look to target square of the wicket as my scoring options. Or, if I felt like some of the finger spinners weren't getting as much purchase off the wicket, then perhaps that was my opportunity to target the side screen a little bit more. So, yeah, pretty simple game plan. And, I was able to execute obviously on the day.
And I know we haven't probably talked about it as much, but you ball off spin and you took a six for in that tournament. So, what's your sort of approach when it comes to spin bowling? Are you trying to just bowl wicket to wicket, or does it depend on the conditions or the batsman, or are you just trying to stick to that line and length and create dot balls in order to create the wicket eventually, or is it more so, is that the process essentially? Like, how do you approach spin bowling in those conditions that facilitate that six for that day?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I think any game where it's bat v ball has to contain an element of, it's condition dependent and it's opponent dependent. What are the opponent's strengths? And as a result of that, how am I going to try and bowl? How am I going to try and set my field? As an example, where's the wind going? Where am I going to try and force them to hit? What's the game scenario? How many, are we defending a big total, a low total? Am I looking to take wickets? Am I looking to contain to bring about wickets? There's so many factors in that question, I suppose. But I remember I got some really good advice from one of the overseas players I was lucky to play with in Bangladesh at the Khulna Tigers. So Mohammad Nawaz, who's obviously got international experience and, played in the PSL for years and, very experienced campaigner and great all-rounder and fantastic bloke. He said to me, I came on at one stage and it was sort of a, pretty clutch moment of a game. And he just said to me, mate, spin the ball hard and try and keep the stumps in play. Like, as simple as that. And it sounds pretty basic, but it sort of narrowed my focus to, rather than sort of worrying about, okay, what's the batter going to be trying to do? Or, geez, if I over pitch, what are the consequences going to be? Or, you all of a sudden you've got these sort of negative thought processes, which maybe I'm more of a sort of an immature bowler in the sense than I am a batter, because I've sort of made all those mistakes and been through a lot of those learnings over the journey. But yeah, that advice to me, I think, really fast tracked certainly my bowling in that particular spell. And, I've tried to keep that in the back of my mind in T20 cricket moving forwards is, spin the ball hard, keep the stumps in play. That's going to be a challenge for any batter in any conditions, I would think.
And not too long after the Nepalese Premier League, you played in the BPL. And I just have an excerpt from an article I think Mohammad Isham wrote. It says, Bosisto's BPL connection was established in 2024 when he battled with Imrul Kayes, the recently retired Bangladesh Test cricketer. Imrul moved to Australia with his family recently, and he heard good things about Bosisto from Mitch Marsh. So when Imrul was building the Khulna team, he recommended Bosisto to his team owner, Iqbal Mahmood, and coach Talha Jubair. So you play a Melbourne tournament with Imrul Kayes, and he said that he was really impressed with your batting, and he asked about your cricket journey and if you're interested to come to Bangladesh, and you jumped on the opportunity. So give us a bit of a background with your relationship with Imrul Kayes.
Yeah, so my background with Imrul is as simple as I played a tournament for the Perth Phantoms. It was over in the Aussie Cricket League in Melbourne. It was a week-long tournament, played in some really challenging conditions, actually. The wicket was pretty spicy and pretty juicy for bowling generally. In particular, well, all bowlers, to be honest, like it was sort of spitting off a length for the pace bowlers and spinning pretty sharply for the spinners. And I was able to have a couple of really good knocks. Imrul and I batted together throughout that tournament a couple of times, and he was obviously reasonably impressed with my performances, and he just sort of asked a bit about my journey and and if I would be interested to play in Bangladesh, to which I obviously I jumped at the opportunity and kept in touch with him, and when the time came around for the next edition of the BPL, I was lucky enough to get picked up by the team that he was playing for. So we played together, and he's a super experienced player, and he's been great. to talk to about the game. And, he's obviously been exposed to spin-friendly conditions from a young age, and, he's played all around the world. So, another experienced player that I was able to lean on and, helped me over in the Bangladesh Premier League.
Yeah, it's really cool hearing that because Imrul, I've been following his career for a long, long time, and it was so random how he decided to kind of move to Australia because I have a lot of friends in Sydney, and I played in the Bangladesh tournaments in Sydney. So like they were telling me how they were some of my friends were like batting with him or like playing against him. So it's like cool, to be playing and versing such a player who's played international cricket. They were sort of starstruck, and some of them know him pretty well and had trained with him. So, learning about how that he kind of spotted you and then, got you into BPL is pretty wild. It must have been a wild journey to have that experience. So when that did, work out and you're in Bangladesh, what was your experience like? Like, did you feel at home in terms of the conditions, as we already talked about when it comes to spin-friendly conditions? Like, how did you sort of prepare in the lead up to the Bangladesh Premier League?
Yeah, I loved it. I absolutely loved. I love playing cricket over there. I love the challenges that the conditions present. And I feel like you've got to be adaptable, and I think that's something that I've always thought of as a strength to my game is just in terms of pure like hand-eye coordination rather than thinking overly technically kind of thing. Sometimes when you're confronted with certain situations, you've got to rely on just hand-eye coordination and skill rather than on sort of technique per se. So, that was sort of something I was able to lean on in those conditions and in this particular set of circumstances. But yeah, I mean, the tournament was played across 3 different cities, and they all presented different pitch conditions and different challenges. So, and it was handy to have a guy like Imrul and even our captain Miraj, who, he's played in all those conditions lots, and he's grown up, and he's a batter and an off spinner as well. So it was nice to be able to talk to him and just get a bit of an understanding about what we were likely to come up against. Whether the ball was likely to skid on under lights or more likely to grip under lights and be difficult to bat. So, speaking to those experienced guys certainly helps you get a gauge of what you might face. And then when you get out there in the middle, it's just about trusting your instincts and, trusting your preparation and trusting your sort of, trusting your skill and your hand-eye coordination, I guess.
And at that time, you would have been facing the likes of Nahid Rana and Salman Irshad, who they can probably bowl 150 kilometers an hour. Maybe you're facing them in the nets as well. So, how was that like facing them?
Yeah, Salman's an amazing bowler. Luckily he was on our team. Like, he's an amazing exponent of slow balls and Yorkers, and hence he's had some great success in the PSL and around the world in various franchise tournaments. And again, he was a great guy to talk to about T20 cricket and about how certain players might be looking to target him, and it just gets your memory working. And it's interesting hearing how elite fast bowlers might think about bowling at the death, and then how I can potentially combat that as a batter next time I encounter certain situations similarly. Facing Nahid Rana, he's an amazing young talent. I'm sure he's got a really bright future with Bangladesh, and there's been a crop of great fast bowlers, probably led by Taskin over the years. But yeah, Nahid Rana and Tanzim Shakib, I think, was another guy who's coming up through the ranks, and Hassan Mahmood, who was on the corner team, who I played with, terrific young guy and really bright prospect. So I think Bangladesh cricket is in good hands, and it'd be nice to be able to hopefully play alongside those guys for many years to come in the BPL.
I have a slight connection to Salman Irshad. Unexpectedly, one day I rocked up for a Bangladesh community cricket tournament match, and I see that Salman Irshad's in the opposition team. So I was facing him on AstroTurf. So that's wasn't a fun experience. This was years ago. This was like, I think it was like 6 years ago, 5 years ago, because he was here for in Sydney with, I think, Harris Ralph. Like, I think a few of the Lahore Qalandars from memory were doing a camp or something like that, or they had some program where they'll be doing training with the BBL teams, like the Big Bash teams or something like that. So he happened to just be playing in random leagues around Sydney, and it just popped up into my game. So that was a fun experience. But yeah, like
Small
in
world, because
regards
I
to
actually,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say
sorry.
I actually got I sorry to interrupt. I got sent a photo by a friend of mine in Adelaide. So when I played in Adelaide, played with a lovely young guy. His name's Malay Joshi. He's a really promising leg spinner playing at Adelaide University Cricket Club. And his dad sent me a photo of Salman and Malay from about 5 or 6 years earlier. So it must have been around a similar time that you're referring to, when Salman was playing in Sydney. So I just thought that was interesting that Salman had come across a friend of mine much earlier on. So there you go. The cricket world is a great little community.
Yeah, like, and that day was such a funny day for me because we didn't actually know him, and so when our opening batsman went to bat and faced him, first ball, our opener, he used to play first grade as well. He got his helmet knocked off, and we're like, "Who the heck is this guy?" And some dude decided to Google search Salman Irshad's name onto Google, and sees a video of him getting Misbah Haq out. I think first ball in the PSL. He's like, "What's this guy doing here?" That was a really funny day. But yeah, like, I came on to bat, so I just like it just zipped through. Like I just like tried to. I mean, it's just kind of what you're talking about. When it's fast, you just react and hope for the best, right? So what's also interesting, batting coach Tamid was actually playing alongside him that game too. So there's a little connection there to Sam Consist as well. But
Interesting.
back
I
to, I
heard
guess, the
his
yeah.
batting
So
coach is a Bangladesh. I heard his Constance's batting coach is a Bangladeshi. Yeah, that's cool.
yeah, and I think he has link. I think he's also partaken in the sort of 50 over domestic competitions in Bangladesh. I think so. He was a regular, I think, first grader in Sydney. So he was pretty known in the Bangladesh, in our own community as well, because he was like one of the best kind of batsmen to come from the Bangladesh Australian community. And so I know he has links to the sort of Bangladesh cricket in Bangladesh, but yeah, it's crazy small
It's
world.
like the
But
Dhaka Premier League.
I think he was in the squad for Prime Bank in Tucker Premier League like years ago. I know that he did. He was part of the
Interesting.
squad, played a practice game, got injured or something like that. Something happened, but yeah, because I used to run. I used to sell cricket bats as well, and I had my own cricket brand. So I'd give him like gear and stuff at that time. So like 2 years. But in regards to the Bangladesh Premier League, so in your first game, you scored 75 not out of 50 balls. And then in another game, you scored 55 not out of 37 balls. So obviously, there a lot of success in the Bangladesh Premier League, and you talked about, I think, all the key ingredients you've already discussed. All in the other innings that you've scored when it comes to adaptability or focus, concentration, playing spin well, all this sort of stuff. So what learnings did you take away from those innings, and what allowed you to succeed in those games as well?
Yeah, certainly overcame some challenges throughout those innings. Those couple of innings that you're referring to, they weren't in the most batter friendly of conditions necessarily, but I was sort of, didn't necessarily get off to a flyer, but I was able to sort of find a way, and that was working for me on that particular day, and just adapt. And I think with the benefit of experience, you get better and better at doing that, because you get a gut feel of, okay, I've been here before. I know that a lower percentage option is XYZ, whereas a higher percentage option might be, another aspect of your strengths. And so I think, I think those innings were just were more or less reinforcement of how far my game has come, and ability not to panic if things don't start out the way you would like them to, or the fact that no innings is ever going to be linear, and just you're never going to just be timing the ball beautiful. Rarely you're going to be timing the ball beautifully from ball one, and just to hang in there, find a way. buy yourself a bit of time, potentially being up the non-strikers end, and that things will get easier the longer you go. And those 2 innings were certainly reflective of that.
And in the BPL, I know you've been so generous with your time, so I'm just ask a few quick questions before we wrap up. Which players in the BPL specifically had impressed you, and who probably were you closest to within your team at Khulna Tigers?
Hassan Mahmood really impressed me. He was our opening bowler. Had really good skills, great ability to bowl Yorkers at the death. Obviously, our overseas players, Salman Irshad, Mohammad Nawaz, Shimron Hetmeyer, Jason Holder, some pretty remarkable players. Some of the locals, Naeem Sheikh, who I opened the batting with for the first 4 or 5 games, he finished as the tournament leading run scorer. He had an incredible ability to find the boundary, essentially. Like you felt like he was getting bogged down, and then all of a sudden he'd hit 4 of his next 6 balls for boundaries, and then all of a sudden he's flying and he's off and running. So he was a really hard worker, and a good stroke maker. Nasim Ahmed, left arm spinner, he opened the bowling for us at times. Another great player. There was lots. Maidul Islam Onkon, he was our keeper, middle order batter. He finished a lot of games with real skill, and he was pretty clutch player. He was able to come in and clear the boundary when we needed 30 off 10 balls and things like that. So a number of really good local players, and and many guys in the other franchises that we played against were good players. So it was just an incredible experience. I loved it.
Maidul Islam Ankon, I'm actually sort of monitoring because he's in the cusp of the national team, and he probably isn't in the team because of Jakir Ali and his performances as well. And he's a keeper bat as well. So it's interesting you mentioned him, because I was actually following the BPL as well. And so, seeing him, like, I think he hit this like shot off Tuskin Ahmed. I clearly remember. I'm like, where did that shot come from? I think it was like a lofted cover drive for 6. Like, it kind of came.
Yeah, I was going to say he hit one over long off in the last over of a game off Tuscan. That was an incredible shot. Yeah, he hits the ball really cleanly over the offside, and he's only a small guy, but he gets a lot of power, and he's really well balanced, and he trains hard. Like, it's interesting seeing him prepare for matches the day before, and watching him go about his business, because he's clearly setting up for that to be a real skill of his, and when he does it on game day, it's no surprise why. But I think he's a top class player.
There any particular?
I'd be surprised if he doesn't play a lot of higher level cricket for Bangladesh moving forward.
So who would you say was the hardest worker, essentially, out of the players you saw?
Probably Naeem Sheikh and Onkon, I would say, would be 2 of the guys that were, just pretty consistent with their. You could see they were aware of what they needed to get done, basically, to be ready to go.
And did they have a lot of exchanges with you, especially like you being, the foreign player in the team, and them probably trying to understand, Australian conditions, and having that in the back of their mind if they were to, tour here?
They both kept in touch, which is lovely. So I was sort of following their progress in the Dhaka Premier League recently, and they're both they'll be a part of touring squads, I'm sure, for Bangladesh coming up. I know there was a test series. I think Onkon was in the squad for the test series against Zimbabwe. And I know Naeem Sheikh won't be too far away, I would imagine, from those sorts of higher representative honours as well. So, my phone is always open to anyone as a passionate cricket person. If I feel like I can help someone else, I'm very open to that. Hopefully those guys wouldn't hesitate to reach out if they were, coming to Australia or felt they wanted a bit of insight into some different conditions around the world.
Definitely. And just to ask last 2 quick questions before we wrap up, who's the best batsman you've seen with your own eyes, and when you saw them, you're like, wow, like this is an amazing batsman that I'm witnessing live? And also, what's the best piece of advice you received in cricket that really transformed your game?
Interesting questions. I think probably Mike Hussey is the one that springs to mind that I've seen live. Yeah, just the way he times the ball so crisply and, seems to effortlessly generate power all around the ground. He was as good as it gets virtually, as far as I'm concerned, from a batsmanship perspective. And the best piece of cricket advice I've received would probably be along the lines of don't rush for the outcome. Like, enjoy the process of what you're doing and sort of embrace the challenges, embrace the mistakes, embrace the learning that those things bring, and just learn to enjoy the ups and downs, I guess, because it's not just all about the outcome. It's more about the journey, and I think that's been something I've been able to take real satisfaction in, particularly over the last 3-4 years. And coincidentally, my outcomes have been better than they ever have been. So that's probably the best piece of cricket advice I've been given.
And my final question is just, who's the most challenging bowler you faced personally?
I faced Muttiah Muralitharan over in Sri Lanka. He was, at the back end of it. He'd retired from Test cricket at this stage, but that was the first time I'd faced a guy where you could hear the ball coming down at you, like it was making like the ball's fizzing because the seam's obviously rotating that quickly. And yeah, like he was incredible. And he was just sort of having more or less having a warm up type bowl at us. He was actually helping us from a bowling perspective, but I got him to bowl a few at me, so that was pretty cool. And he'd probably be the best, I'd say, just because his capacity to spin the ball both ways at pace. 800 Test wickets probably speaks for itself.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. And I know Adam Crosswell actually said the same thing about hearing Morley's fizzing when he's released the ball. That's actually incredible. Who knows? Like, is that even possible? Like, even just for a normal cricketer myself, when someone's telling me they can actually hear the ball, as it's being delivered, that's ridiculous, So, insane.
Yeah.
A legendary bowler. But I know, thank you so much for your time. I know, it's been a long episode, but I think, kind of the aim was to get an idea of your career, your trajectory, and we're able to sort of go at depth and unpack a lot of important conversations where I feel, if any cricketer listens from start to end, they can really pick up on a lot of things which they can implement and, be better players as a result. And I don't know if you had any other sort of final thoughts you wanted to share, or anything missed in particular that you wanted to talk about or mention before we put the podcast on a close.
No, I don't think anything else that comes to mind that I'd like to share. But yeah, just like to thank you for your time. And I love the work that you're doing. And I think it's fantastic that young cricketers getting the opportunity to hear from yourself and from guests that you can have on the show and their experiences and their journeys, because I think that's a great way to share information and for people to learn and embrace the challenges of our great game.
Exactly, yeah, and that's the objective of the show. So thank you so much, and it definitely feels like you believe in the project and the ethos as well. So I appreciate your time and effort as well, just sharing all those insights throughout your cricketing journey. So I'd like to just kind of direct our audience to go on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and give us a 5-star ratings and support the show. And go on YouTube and subscribe there as well. And we're on Instagram, TikTok, etc. as well. So give us a follow and a share our content there as well. And we make a lot of clips too, so share that with your friends and family. So from our special guest, Will Bosisto, we wish you all the best. This is Tanzam signing off. Take care.